What kind of emperor inherits a crown worth less than the bread his people need? Kashin receives exactly that crown, along with 40 days before his capital begins to starve. At 19, he is crowned inside a grand hall with half its roof missing. Rain stains the floor, old fire scars blacken the stone, and winter wind owns the room. Only 11 people attend the ceremony, including 9 nobles already waiting for him to fail. Their applause sounds less like loyalty and more like vultures tapping their beaks together. 5 years earlier, Emperor Otto von Kronberg crossed the border under cover of darkness. He burned Aschenfeld, emptied its treasury, and murdered Kashin's father before returning home by noon. Kronberg never wanted the city, because leaving it alive and broken was the crueler warning. Kashin survived by hiding inside a servant's passage and listening to the killer's laugh. That laughter became the one inheritance no enemy could melt down or steal. Now, the same frightened boy wears an iron crown over an empire everyone calls dead. Instead of resting after the ceremony, Kashin orders Aldrich to show him the entire disaster. From the palace hill, Aschenfeld spreads below like a corpse that forgot to stop breathing. Once, 80,000 people filled its markets, docks, workshops, and crowded river streets. Now, barely 12,000 remain, and those strong enough to leave are leaving every week. The wealthy families fled with their gold, while ordinary citizens stayed because they had nowhere else. Collapsed sewers pour waste through open gutters, and sickness waits beneath every doorway. Empty mansions rot above districts where children drink from the same river carrying the city's filth. A thin woman watches Kashin pass while holding a gray-faced child against her chest. She does not bow, curse, or beg, because hope has already been worn out of her. Kashin forces himself to meet her eyes and accept what his family's throne has become. Aldrich reveals the harvest failed, the nearby fields lie abandoned, and the granaries are nearly empty. Kronberg raiders cross the border whenever farmers try to work beyond the broken walls. The city has enough grain for 40 days, perhaps 45 under brutal rationing. After that, winter arrives, the roads close, and Aschenfeld begins dying in numbers. The treasury contains no coin, the army barely exists, and 9 noble houses circle the throne. Any sensible ruler would abandon the Iron Crown and purchase a quiet life somewhere south. Kashin refuses, because every night he still hears Otto's soldiers laughing over his father's blood. He decides that before revenge, before pride, and before restoring the throne, his people must survive. At the bottom of the hill, he finds a public square built around a ruined stone well. A burned roof beam collapsed into it during the sack and left the clean spring buried for 5 years. The district now drinks from the poisoned river because moving the rubble seemed impossible. Kashin studies the block shaft and reduces the empire's misery to one simple truth. Clean water lies below, rubble stands above, and rubble can be moved by human hands. He asks Aldrich to gather anyone in the square still strong enough to lift a stone. Only 5 men answer, including a crippled mason, 2 former barge loaders, and an old soldier. Their faces carry the same exhausted emptiness Kashin saw in the woman with the child. Kashin removes his fine coat and admits he has no money to pay them. He promises only his own labor, public water, and the chance to begin with 1 stone. Then he removes the iron crown and places it on the ruined well. The crown cannot buy a loaf, but the water beneath it could keep a whole district alive. The mason spits into his hands and decides he has followed worse men for smaller reasons. Kashin grips the first stone, and the emperor begins digging on his coronation day. The work is vicious, because soaked timber has twisted around broken masonry deep inside the shaft. His hands blister within an hour and bleed before the sun reaches the center of the sky. The barge brothers rig ropes, the old soldier directs leverage, and the mason commands the excavation. For the first time in years, forgotten workers discover that their hands still matter. People gather around the square, first to stare and then to wonder what the boy emperor is doing. By afternoon, dozens watch Kashin haul rubble without his coat, his crown, or any royal dignity. A boy of 10 slips through the crowd and drags away a broken timber without being asked. Kashin nods to him as one worker acknowledging another, and the child immediately stands taller. That small gesture spreads through the square more powerfully than any speech from a balcony. One citizen takes a rope, another clears debris, and soon the watchers become part of the work. As sunset burns orange across the ruined roofs, the final great stone breaks loose. The brothers lower a bucket and wait while the rope uncoils into the darkness. Instead of striking foul sludge, the bucket lands with the deep, clean sound of spring water. They raise it, brimming and clear, holding the last sunlight like trembling gold. The mason drinks first, then laughs with the disbelief of a man tasting hope after 5 years. The workers drink, the child soaks his shirt, and the thin woman closes her eyes over the cup. Cassian drinks last, because an emperor who promised shared water should wait behind his people. For one brief moment, nobody sees him as a doomed boy wearing a worthless crown. They see the man who moved the first stone, and proved that impossible things sometimes have handles. One well cannot repair a dead city, but it can change what a frightened population believes. Cassian lifts the iron crown from the stone, but does not place it back on his head. He promises himself that Kronberg will pay for every burned street and every stolen future. First, however, he must keep 12,000 people alive through the approaching winter. What Cassian does not know is far to the east, Otto hears that the new emperor spent his first day clearing a well. The conqueror laughs over supper and dismisses Cassian as a child playing in mud. Otto orders his messengers to report again only when the boy does something that matters. That comfortable laugh becomes the first mistake in a chain that will eventually destroy him. That night, Cassian cannot sleep inside the roofless hall, where the cold wind moves freely. His bandaged hands throb, while the same impossible numbers circle behind his eyes. 40 days of grain, 12,000 mouths, no army, no money, and 9 waiting vultures. Then pale golden letters unfold in the darkness where only Cassian can see them. The crown system recognizes him as sovereign and declares that an ancient power has awakened. His bloodline once built Velmar not only through stone, but through oaths freely and truly sworn. That power slept while the royal house decayed, waiting for one genuine promise to awaken it. Cassian's vow beside the ruined well was true enough to call the system back. The system explains that its strength comes from loyalty that cannot be purchased or forced. The strongest bond is a marriage oath, freely chosen and honestly meant by both hearts. For every true bond, the system will grant gold, knowledge, materials, and the means to rebuild. False affection, political calculation, and empty vows will produce almost nothing. The system cannot be deceived because it measures what a heart truly believes. The deeper the bond, the greater the resources that will flow into the broken empire. Cassian understands the danger immediately, because every legend warns against voices offering impossible gifts. This is the first thing in 5 years that adds something instead of taking it away. He asks the golden letters where a ruler with nothing should begin. The system directs him toward a ruined house, his court deliberately cast aside. It tells him to seek the first heart that may stand beside him without being bought. The name appearing in the darkness is the disgraced House of Morn. Cassian knows that family once counted taxes, roads, harvests, thefts, and every hidden wound in Velmar. The nobles destroyed them precisely because accurate numbers exposed how much the powerful were stealing. Before dawn, Cassian rises with bandaged hands and a smile nobody has seen for 5 years. Winter remains 40 days away, but the first path through the darkness has finally appeared. He looks toward the sleeping city and quietly decides that the House of Morn will be the next stone. At sunrise, he leaves Aldrich behind and walks alone toward the poorest end of River Street. An emperor arriving with guards would be making an offer from above, and Cassian needs something truer. He approaches the Morn bookshop as a tired young man, with scars beneath fresh bandages. Behind its cracked windows waits the mind that will teach a dead empire how to count again. The House of Morn is no palace, but a cold bookshop surrounded by a garden long gone wild. Inside, shelves bend under working ledgers, survey maps, and books softened by years of use. A young woman sits behind a table covered with calculations and tells Cassian the shop is closed. Lysandra Morn has ink-stained fingers, mended clothes, and eyes that measure people like accounts. She recognizes the emperor immediately, not from the crown, but from the bandages around his hands. News of the well traveled faster than food, money, or royal orders ever move through Ashenfeld. Lysandra refuses to bow and predicts exactly why Cassian has come before he can explain himself. He has 40 days of grain, an empty treasury, no army, and nobles waiting to divide the remains. His father allowed the counting houses to be destroyed, and now the throne needs one desperately. Lysandra has already calculated the empire's future and declares that Ashenfeld is not dying. It is already dead, she says, and simply is not finished falling over. The intelligent choice is to leave before winter closes the roads and buries everyone inside. Cassian finds her honesty more valuable than every comforting lie spoken at his coronation. Beneath her hand lies a detailed map, marked with collapsed drains and reparable walls. A person who truly abandoned a city would not map every broken street in such painful detail. Cassian asks why she is still drawing solutions for a place she insists cannot be saved. For the first time, Lysandra's cold certainty hesitates under the weight of her own contradiction. She could have sold her genius to any wealthy trade city and lived comfortably years ago. Instead, she remains beside a dead garden, counting the wounds of the home that betrayed her family. She does not believe in hope, but she cannot stop solving the problem. Wanting something and proving it possible belong in different columns, Lysandra warns him. Cassian agrees, and offers her neither sentiment, flattery, salary, nor loyalty he has not earned. He admits his entire treasury consists of an iron crown, bleeding hands, and one unfinished promise. Then he offers Lysandra the most interesting arithmetic on the continent. Every clever mind says the city cannot be saved, so she can prove every clever mind wrong. He is not buying her faith in him, because faith demanded without evidence is another kind of theft. He asks only for her curiosity and the vicious pleasure of solving what everyone calls impossible. Lysandra looks at the hopeful word reparable written in the margin of her own map. She finally agrees to examine the corpse, while insisting she believes in the problem, the boy. Behind Cassian's eyes, the crown system quietly announces that a genuine bond has formed. Lysandra stands with him at 15%, trusting the work while withholding trust from its ruler. The reward is modest, but real gold enters the treasury for the first time in 5 years. Cassian hides the system from her, knowing a counter must be convinced by results instead of miracles. They spend the entire day reducing Ashenfeld's chaos into a sequence the city can follow. Lysandra explains that a city is not 1,000 separate disasters, but one connected machine. Fix the parts in the wrong order, and every last coin disappears into something useless. Fix them correctly, and each repair creates the labor, safety, or income needed for the next. She draws a 4-layer pyramid and begins with clean water at the base. A hungry person can work for days, but a sick person cannot rebuild anything. After water comes food, because healthy workers still need enough strength to survive winter. After food comes the wall, not for pride, but to make the nearby fields safe enough to farm. Only then should they rebuild workshops, mills, forges, and the production that creates lasting wealth. Water, food, wall, production, in that order, and no other. 4 words transform a hopeless empire into a brutal, but possible list of tasks. But then Cassian compares old tax records against Lysandra's maps and finds a missing number. Before the sack, Ashenfeld stored enough reserve grain to survive 2 terrible winters. Kronberg burned the river district, but the main granary still stands untouched and completely empty. A standing empty granary is not a tragedy of war, Lysandra realizes, but evidence of theft. Someone removed the grain and hid it, while the city blamed the enemy for its disappearance. The thief plans to sell it back when winter makes starving citizens willing to pay anything. Lysandra comes alive before the hidden arithmetic, because lies in a ledger offend her personally. Instead of searching warehouses openly, she tracks the weight carried by wagons across the east gate. Grain is bulky, heavy, and impossible to move without bending axles and exhausting horses. Drivers complain in taverns, factors leave receipts, and false wool shipments still ride too low. Within 4 days, Lysandra traces the missing reserve to a warehouse controlled by merchant call. 6 wagons entered, carrying the weight of a harvest, while almost nothing left the building. Cashin wants the people fed immediately, even if seizing the grain, warns the mastermind behind call. Lysandra approves the decision, quietly noting that Cashin chooses hungry citizens over a clever trap. They go at midday with Aldrich, the 5 workers from the well, and a growing crowd of witnesses. Cashin wears the iron crown deliberately, because this time the symbol must carry public authority. Call protests that the warehouse contains lawful wool intended for Western markets. The Barge brothers force open the doors, and stacked grain sacks rise from floor to rafters. The starving crowd first gasps, then releases a low growl. No hired guard wants to challenge. Cashin speaks quietly, making Call's crime sound even uglier by refusing to decorate it with rage. Call turned suffering into an investment and planned to profit when children became desperate. The crown seizes the grain and distributes it fairly, charging nothing to those unable to pay. Cashin refuses to execute Call, because he will not begin restoring law with a convenient killing. Instead, the merchant is stripped of standing and driven from a city that will remember his face. The low districts begin whispering a new title for the boy on the hill. He is no longer merely the doomed emperor, but the ruler who found the stolen grain. Lysandra watches from the edge of the crowd and gives him the smallest approving nod. But then 4 days later, the hidden mastermind strikes at the person Cashin values most. Lord Halvern sends armed bravos with torches and a forged order against the House of Morn. They drag ledgers into the street and prepare to burn 5 generations of knowledge in daylight. The message is clear, because anyone who stands beside Cashin will be punished as an example. Cold arithmetic tells him to protect the throne, preserve momentum, and avoid risking everything for one ally. Lysandra still believes only partly, and losing Cashin would end the entire struggle before it begins. Cashin rejects the calculation and runs down the hill with Aldrich and the 5 well workers. He reaches River Street as Lysandra faces 12 armed men with nothing but a fireplace poker. Cashin steps directly between the torches and the woman, everyone else abandoned. He warns that the next man moving against her raises his hand against the crown before public witnesses. Halvern paid them for an easy cruelty, not for treason, hanging, and a fight with their emperor. The bravos measure the new cost, drop the torch, and retreat without earning enough to die. Only after they disappear does the poker fall from Lysandra's shaking hands. 5 years of believing nobody would come break across her face in one stunned moment. She tells Cashin the rescue made no sense, because he risked the whole empire for one piece. Cashin answers that she is not a piece, and some values never belong inside a ledger. He decided beside the first well, that he would not preserve power by letting people burn. Lysandra realizes he threw away the correct calculation for her, knowing exactly what it could cost. The question inside her changes from whether the city can be saved to whether it can be saved with him. She takes his offered hand and admits that belief in the work has become belief in the man. The crown system blazes brighter as her bond rises from cautious curiosity to deep chosen trust. For the first time, enough gold pours into the empty treasury to change what reconstruction can mean. Lysandra then discovers the secret, because no emperor suddenly produces funds without attracting her attention. She tests every explanation and arrives at one. True bonds create the resources Ashenfeld desperately needs. She proposes marriage with the same clear logic she uses to repair budgets and expose hidden grain. The oath is not political theater, because both understand the danger and choose the partnership freely. Cashin accepts because he wants Lysandra beside him beyond the crisis, not merely because the system pays. Their marriage turns the fragile treasury into the first real capital the dead empire has possessed. With Lysandra directing every coin, the city begins rebuilding in the correct order at last. The first new funds reopen every ruined well and cistern across Ashenfeld's crowded districts. Workers who once labored for promises now receive real wages, steady meals, and public respect. The seized grain is rationed fairly, while Lysandra purchases more before winter seals the southern rows. Next comes the northeastern breach, where Kronberg raiders enter whenever farmers approach the nearby fields. Aschenfeld lacks enough quarried stone, so Lysandra turns abandoned wealth into public defense. The empty mansions of nobles who fled are carefully dismantled for marble and dressed blocks. Their useless walls become the living wall that protects families who stayed behind. The crippled mason becomes foreman, the barge brothers manage hauling, and the old soldier runs scaffolds. Even the 10-year-old from the well receives small duties, a small wage, and enormous pride. One forge and one carpenter's shop open beside the construction as seeds for future production. Within 6 weeks, lit windows return to streets that had been dark for 5 years. Cook fires burn, workers sing badly, and citizens begin speaking about spring as something they may see. Cassian and Lysandra climb the half-built wall one evening and look across the breathing city. She has run the sums 100 times, and every version once proved this transformation impossible. Now, she admits that being wrong has never felt so satisfying. Yet the smell rising from the lower districts exposes the pyramid's unfinished foundation. Clean wells cannot save a city while collapsed drains keep flooding streets with human waste. The approaching spring will warm the stagnant filth and bring another wave of disease. Rebuilding ancient sewers demands engineering. No mason in Aschenfeld understands anymore. Grades, arches, pressure, channels, and buried loads belong to knowledge lost for 3 centuries. Lysandra remembers rumors of an order preserving the old builder's secrets inside the northern mountains. The builder mechanics hide from kings, refuse students, reject petitions, and guard their craft from war. If anyone can separate clean water from foul water permanently, it is that hidden order. Cassian immediately decides to find them, because a city cannot stand on a poisoned foundation. He leaves Lysandra governing Aschenfeld and follows fading mountain rumors with Aldrich and 2 barge brothers. The journey takes 11 days through freezing paths where roads become tracks and tracks vanish entirely. At last, they discover ancient dam holding a green lake between walls of living rock. A carved door opens before they can knock, revealing a quiet young engineer named Agia. Stone dust marks her clothes, calluses cover her pale hands, and her eyes constantly measure the world. Agia has orders to hear the emperor refuse him politely and send him back down the mountain. Cassian does not begin with the request, because a maker deserves to have her work truly seen. He asks to walk through the hidden complex before accepting the rejection. Agia reluctantly agrees, unable to resist showing genuine craftsmanship to someone who cares about it. Inside the mountain, water turns wheels, hammers, lifts, valves, furnaces, and heating channels. Clean streams run through every hall, while waste disappears through a separate hidden network. Stone arches support impossible weight by sending force outward, instead of simply resisting downward pressure. The order solved every problem currently killing Aschenfeld, and then buried the solutions behind a locked door. Cassian asks whether those same methods could rebuild his sewers and stop the coming plague. Agia admits they could, but repeats that the order builds only for itself. Its elders believe sharing knowledge lets kings weaponize aqueducts, destroy rivals, and erase the craft again. By hiding, the order preserved engineering through centuries of conquest and foolishness. Cassian understands the fear, but he cannot place it beside the memory of a sick child drinking sewage. He tells Agia he is not asking for a weapon, but for 12,000 people to stop dying in filth. His anger sharpens when he realizes salvation exists only 11 days from those poisoned streets. Agia accuses him of unfairness, and Cassian immediately admits that the world's cruelty is not her fault. Still, the distance between dying children and locked knowledge remains a rule someone chose to obey. That truth cracks the certainty Agia has repeated since childhood. She does not promise help, but asks to inspect Aschenfeld before refusing it forever. Agia travels down with Cassian, calling the journey an assessment while already solving problems in her mind. From the last ridge, she reads the old drainage routes from the city's slopes and buried contours. She identifies where the ancient builders used gravity, where sections collapsed, and where the bones remain sound. The network is damaged but rebuildable, because the original design still lies beneath the streets. Ajia asks to see the worst district, and Cashin leads her into standing waste without softening anything. She kneels ankle-deep in filth, feels along a broken channel, and suddenly understands the ancient structure. Her entire face changes when the dead system becomes a repairable machine beneath her hands. Ajia declares she can raise it, and her order may punish her after the work is finished. The crown system supplies ancient plans, but paper alone cannot move stone or teach frightened workers. Ajia becomes the bridge between forgotten knowledge and thousands of ordinary hands. First, she surveys every street using a weighted line and a simple frame to measure the land's fall. She teaches the mason, the brothers, and labor crews that water always obeys patient, exact slopes. Then entire streets open during the coldest weeks of winter. Citizens dig through frozen earth, collapsed arches, sewage, and the buried wreckage of 3 centuries. Cashin works in the worst trenches, leaving the crown at the palace and taking the same mud as everyone. The treasury feeds and pays every crew, making public labor a profession instead of desperate charity. The old soldier designs safe shoring, while the boy from the well guards Ajia's instruments like sacred relics. Ajia teaches instead of commanding, because correct work requires understanding rather than blind obedience. Dock workers learn why an arch pushes outward, how grade controls flow, and why careless stone clogs channels. People once treated as useless begin mastering secrets kings had been denied for generations. The dead mansions surrender. More martyr, now lining drains that will carry the whole city's waste away. Once each section closes, crews pave the streets and crown them so rain runs toward hidden channels. Carts stop sinking into mud, stagnant pools disappear, and clean wells remain clean after storms. Ajia then designs an aqueduct from a spring above Aschenfeld, where nothing downstream can contaminate it. Arch by arch, the channel marches from the hills toward fountains waiting in every district. The system grants materials, but the citizens provide the labor, patience, and pride that make them permanent. By spring, Aschenfeld has spent an entire winter rebuilding the invisible bones beneath its streets. On the day the aqueduct opens, nearly the whole city gathers in the square of the first well. Ajia lifts the final gate, and a rushing sound travels closer through miles of newly laid stone. Clean mountain water erupts from the fountain and scatters sunlight across 10,000 shouting faces. Children run into the spray as if the city itself has finally broken through the earth. The woman from the doorway appears again, holding a child, no longer gray, weak, or close to death. Her tears tell Cashin more about victory than any noble title ever could. Ajia watches the water and realizes what centuries of guarded knowledge were always meant to accomplish. The craft was never preserved merely to survive in darkness, but to improve human life in daylight. She thanks Cashin for being angry at the right distance between power and suffering. Across the city, sickness collapses because clean water and waste can no longer poison each other. Roads dry, population grows, workers remain healthy, and Lysandra's pyramid gains a solid, permanent base. During months of frozen trenches and shared problems, Cashin and Ajia develop a quieter kind of trust. They understand each other through useful beauty, careful hands, and the satisfaction of work built correctly. Ajia chooses not to return to the mountain, even though the order's anger will eventually find her. She accepts responsibility for roads, water, stone, and every structure the reborn empire will need. Their marriage is sworn beside the fountain rather than beneath jeweled banners. Both know exactly what they are promising, and both mean the promise without pressure or disguise. The crown system recognizes another true oath and grants not only wealth, but engineering capability itself. Aschenfeld now possesses the knowledge to build arches, aqueducts, roads, engines, and defenses once thought impossible. What none of them know is the hidden spider inside Cashin's court has heard about the aqueduct. A well could be dismissed and stolen grain explained, but an aqueduct means the corpse has chosen life. The conspirator begins watching Cashin's final visible weakness, convinced ambition will soon outrun money. For a moment, the spider is correct. The city has clean water, food, roads, walls, and workshops, but every miracle is draining the treasury. Lysandra discovers that unless Ashenfeld learns to create wealth, its beautiful resurrection will die of success. The gold from 2 true oaths once felt endless, but reconstruction consumes capital faster than hope can replace it. Lysandra shows Cashin a treasury line falling toward darkness within 2 months. Ashenfeld has built a healthy body, yet nothing inside it pumps new wealth through the system. The city has been surviving on miraculous transfusions instead of producing income of its own. Without a mint, markets, taxes, and trade, the lamps will go dark exactly when citizens trust them most. Lysandra can count money and Agia can build with it, but neither knows how to make it multiply. Only one name on the coast carries enough commercial genius to solve that final problem. Vivian Duffert rules the free city of Solmere through contracts, credit, shipping, and ruthless arithmetic. She is famous for believing in profit, distrusting sentiment, and pricing everything that enters her office. Cashin decides that every person loves something beneath the obvious thing they claim to value. To save Ashenfeld's economy, he must discover what Vivian loves beneath gold. Solmere has no walls, because every kingdom depends on its banks, markets, docks, and promises. Attacking the free city would bankrupt the attacker and unite every creditor on the coast. Its streets roar with ships, spices, languages, tariffs, wagers, and money changing hands without rest. Cashin also finds mansions built by nobles who fled Ashenfeld with wealth stolen from its future. They laugh at the bankrupt emperor visiting the richest city alive. Vivian makes him wait 3 days, using his time to remind him how little his crown is worth. There, Cashin spends every hour walking the markets and studying how Solmer's money moves. He watches coins weighed, carts taxed, factors bribed, ships unloaded, and bargains made across crowded tables. Patterns learned from Lysandra begin appearing beneath the noise. One money changer weighs every coin twice, except pieces arriving through a particular shipping house. Dock tariffs produce slightly less than the volume of trade should create. Cashin follows the discrepancy and discovers someone mixing debased silver into legitimate coin shipments. The counterfeit rate is low enough to escape ordinary inspections while slowly stealing trust from the Solmark. When Vivian finally receives him, her accounting chamber looks richer than Cashin's restored throne room. She is elegant, amused, and already calculating how quickly the desperate emperor will begin begging. Instead, Cashin tells her that Solmer's trusted currency is being counterfeited under her own roof. Her smile disappears, because challenging her arithmetic is the one introduction no petitioner ever attempts. Cashin lays out the strange weights, missing tariff value, protected money changer, and contaminated shipments. Vivian immediately sees 3 implications he missed, while he notices one connection she overlooked. Within hours, they hunt the scheme together through ledgers, cargo lists, and human behavior. Their minds move at matching speed, each forcing the other toward sharper conclusions. By nightfall, they expose a senior factor and shipping house, quietly shaving a fortune from public trust. Vivian arrests the conspirators before they understand how the visiting beggar found them. Afterward, she pours wine more expensive than Cashin's crown and finally gives him real attention. She recognizes the habits of a merchant mind inside a ruler who supposedly came only to ask for money. Cashin explains that Solmere taught him something during those 3 deliberate days of waiting. Vivian does not truly worship gold, because gold is only the score written beside a more interesting game. She loves finding value before anyone else, taking intelligent risks, and winning through superior understanding. Then Cashin presents Ashenfeld not as a tragedy, but as the greatest investment opportunity on the coast. 4 seasons earlier, it was a corpse. Now it has clean water, roads, walls, workshops, and loyal citizens. The restored city sits where northern wool, timber, ore, salt, cloth, and coastal trade could meet. Its old roots are empty only because every merchant still thinks Ashenfeld remains dead. A mint, stable coin, open market, and future harbor could turn the capital into a second commercial power. The investor arriving first would shape the rules, own the debt, command the trust, and capture the growth. Cassian is not asking Vivin to save helpless people, but because charity would bore and insult her. He is offering the ground floor of the richest new market the coast may see in a generation. Vivin laughs with genuine delight when she realizes the bankrupt emperor came to sell her a stake. The risk is terrifying, because Kronberg still waits, the treasury is thin, and one failed season could end everything. The upside is a trade empire carrying Vivin's design from the sea into the northern interior. She accepts because the speculation is too intelligent, too dangerous, and too interesting to ignore. Winning her investment is immediate. Winning her trust becomes a longer and far more valuable game. Vivin travels to Ashenfeld and begins with the mint, explaining that money is not metal, but agreement. A coin matters only while everyone trusts its weight, purity, edge, and promise of future acceptance. She designs sound silver with milled edges that reveal shaving and a mark difficult to counterfeit. The first new coin carries Cassian's father's profile, restoring continuity before promoting the young emperor's face. Vivin warns that debasing currency solves one short crisis by murdering generations of trust. Cassian promises that Ashenfeld's coin will never lie about what it contains. Then Vivin sends word across the coast that the northern city is alive, safe, and open for business. Merchants arrive cautiously because her name guarantees opportunities they do not want rivals to reach first. Northern wool, iron, and timber flow south, while salt, cloth, tools, and spice travel inland. Every cart pays a tiny toll for safe roads, guarded markets, and reliable coin. Vivin teaches Cassian to tax movement and profit, instead of squeezing peasants already struggling to recover. A small charge on thousands of transactions creates more revenue than crushing a few exhausted households. The people keep more of what they earn, work harder, spend more, and stop seeing the throne as a predator. Mercy and profit point in the same direction when the system is designed intelligently. Lysandra runs the figures repeatedly and finally announces that the treasury line has turned upward. For the first time since the coronation, Ashenfeld earns more money than it spends. The lamps, wages, repairs, and grain purchases can continue without waiting for another miraculous bond. Cassian realizes Vivin loves victory more than wealth, while wealth merely records where victory happened. She discovers something equally unfamiliar in Ashenfeld, a game worthy of her entire mind. Vivin has spent years pricing everyone because no one offered a partnership more interesting than ownership. Now Lysandra challenges her calculations, Agia challenges her deadlines, and Cassian keeps pace with both. Their work becomes trust, their trust becomes affection, and affection survives every calculation Vivin performs. When marriage is proposed, she measures the risks honestly and still chooses the answer beyond numbers. The crown system accepts her oath as genuine and pours trade mastery into the growing empire. Gold arrives again, but the true reward is a heart that can keep beating after miracles stop. With the economy secure, Cassian walks through markets that were silent less than a year earlier. Coins ring across counters, traders argue in many languages, and workshops sell more than the city consumes. Yet he sees that overland roads are only a narrow stream compared with the sea. Ashenfeld needs a harbor where ships can connect the northern interior with the entire coast. The nearest deep water lies one day south at a sheltered bay beside a tiny fishing village. Cassian brings Agia and Vivin to the shore, and both stare at the same empty water differently. Agia reads depth, currents, stone, wind, piling ground, and the lines where breakwaters should rise. Vivin sees cargo capacity, tariffs, shipping routes, warehouses, and a commercial hinge between land and sea. One sees structure, the other sees value, and Cassian sees what neither vision can achieve alone. He orders them to build the harbor together and turn an overlooked bay into Ashenfeld's door to the world. Lysandra joins them to control the cost, and the three brilliant women immediately begin disagreeing about everything. Agia demands work sound enough to survive 3 centuries of winter storms. Vivin demands speed before rival ports steal the opportunity and redirect the coming trade. Lysandra demands stage construction so perfection and urgency do not bankrupt the entire empire. Cassian believed ruling meant choosing which advisor was correct. Now, he understands his task is keeping the right people arguing until a stronger answer emerges. The first deep water mole will open early, earn revenue, and fund later expansion without weakening the final design. The harbor begins as a compromise nobody loves and becomes a plan better than any one genius created alone. Vivin jokingly describes the marriages as an investment portfolio and nearly starts a civil war at the planning table. Lysandra objects to being called stable fixed income, while Agia rejects being labeled depreciating infrastructure. Cassian wisely lets the argument burn, knowing their friction is already shaping a better government. Below them, workers drive the first stones into the bay, while shipwrights prepare empty slips for future hulls. Ashenfeld has found its economic heart, and now that heart begins reaching toward the sea. Building the harbor consumes the entire summer and forces every lesson of the reborn city into one project. Agia sinks enormous stone masses along the bay's natural lines to break the strength of incoming waves. Behind the breakwaters, wild water settles into a calm basin where ships can anchor through storms. Long moles extend toward depths that fully loaded merchant vessels can reach without grounding. Counterweighted cranes lift cargo in minutes that once required 50 exhausted dock workers. Vivin plans warehouses before the first ship arrives and shipyards before the first warehouse fills. She insists that trading through other nations' vessels leaves too much profit and power in foreign hands. Ashenfeld must carry its own goods, charge its own freight, and guard its own shipping lanes. Agia agrees for different reasons, warning that merchant wealth without warships becomes an invitation to raiders. The little fishing village changes faster than anyone imagined. Men once ignored as poor boatmen become harbor pilots because they alone understand the bay's hidden currents. Families that buried drowned sons now earn wages guiding great ships safely between stone arms. The first functional dock opens before the whole harbor is finished, exactly as Lysandra planned. Revenue from early cargo funds the next pier, and each completed section pays for another. Vivin wins her race against rival investors without forcing Agia to weaken the permanent structure. Agia wins her argument with the sea when the first autumn storm breaks harmlessly against her stones. Lysandra wins the ledger war when the harbor remains solvent through every stage. Cassian wins nothing alone, and that realization becomes the center of his new way of ruling. He no longer needs to be the smartest person in every room. He needs to gather people whose talents become greater when aimed at the same impossible goal. By autumn, foreign sails crowd water that held only fishing boats months earlier. Northern goods move outward by ship, while coastal goods travel inland through Ashenfeld's guarded roads. The treasury stops merely recovering and begins overflowing faster than rebuilding can spend it. Merchant ships launch under Ashenfeld's mark, followed by lean warships designed to protect them. The capital now possesses clean streets, full markets, sound coin, rising walls, and a fleet at sea. Cassian rides to the longest mole at dusk and finally allows himself to feel exhausted. A little over a year earlier, he had owned 40 days of grain and an iron crown. Now, anterns double in calm water beneath docks built where grieving fishermen once watched empty waves. He remembers that he only moved the first stone and gave other people a reason to move the rest. Lysandra counted, Agia built, Vivin financed, and thousands of citizens turned their skills into a nation. Cassian looks east across the dark water and silently tells Otto that the answer is almost ready. Everything being built, from drains to warships, leads toward the laughter on his father's steps. That is when inside Kronberg's warm hall, Otto receives reports of Ashenfeld's harbor and newly launched warships. For the first time, the old conqueror does not laugh. A lit city might be sentiment, a wall might be caution, and a market might be temporary luck. A fleet means Cassian can strike outward, protect trade, and become a true rival on Otto's border. Otto realizes waiting has made the cost of destroying Ashenfeld rise every season. The boy he could have crushed with raiders now commands walls those raiders cannot breach. Still unwilling to spend a full army, Otto chooses pressure short of open war. He orders border attacks increased tenfold against the Eisenwald clans guarding Aschenfeld's northern flank. Burning those proud mountain people should force Cassian to waste money and attention away from the harbor. Otto believes suffering at the frontier will distract the young emperor and slow his growth. Instead, the attack reveals the next missing part of the empire. Reports arrive describing farms burned, villages emptied, and mountain warriors overwhelmed by repeated columns. The Eisenwald have held those passes alone for generations without kneeling to any lowland crown. Their fighters absorb Kronberg's first blows, so Aschenfeld's protected interior remains untouched. Lysandra explains the strategically cold choice with complete honesty. Cassian could retreat behind his strong walls and allow the independent clans to be destroyed. They are not formal subjects, owe him no oath, and have never asked the throne for help. Saving them risks soldiers, money, time, and every project not yet finished. Cassian already knows he will reject that arithmetic because the frontier burns, partly because he became a threat. The people paying for his rise deserve more than abandonment. Written as strategy, Lysandra also warns that the Eisenwald are fiercely proud and may spit on any offer of rescue. They have buried children for years, while lowland rulers enjoyed safety behind their sacrifices. Cassian decides not to offer rescue, pity, purchase, or demands for submission. He will offer the one thing the mountain clans have wanted, but could never seize alone. Kronberg is their enemy and his, and both debts can be collected in the same war. Cassian prepares Aegea's transportable stone-throwing engines, Viven's gold, and the best fighters Aschenfeld has. The city guard is not yet an army, which is exactly why he must reach the people who understand war. He rides north with Lysandra through farms blackened simply to make suffering spread. Each mile exposes how much protection the Eisenwald provided without thanks or recognition. Villages behind the passes survived, while mountain families died holding enemies away from strangers. Cassian's shame deepens because he built fountains and docks while they fought alone. The Eisenwald fortress sits inside a narrow pass, all gray stone, iron, smoke, and unresolved grief. Their leader meets him in the muddy yard without ceremony or respect. Brunhilde Eisenwald towers over Cassian, broad as a door and marked by wounds she barely bothered bandaging. Her voice carries like a war horn, even when she speaks calmly. She calls him the well-digging land emperor, who builds pretty lamps while mountain children burn. The clan does not want lowland pity, soft promises, purchased loyalty, or another noble seeking a song. Brunhilde tells Cassian to return to his fountains because the Eisenwald are busy dying. Every word is brutal, and Cassian accepts that every word has been earned. He admits the clans held the line for 5 years while no emperor came. He admits Aschenfeld remained safe enough to rebuild because their blood absorbed Kronberg's violence. Then Cassian explains why the raids became so much worse after the harbor opened. Otto is not attacking the Eisenwald because he suddenly values their land. He is burning them to send a message to Cassian and break the shield protecting a rising rival. Their suffering is the price Kronberg chose to place on Aschenfeld's growing strength. Cassian refuses to disguise that responsibility beneath heroic language. He also refuses to offer charity, because the clans neither need nor respect it. He brings siege engines, money for steel, supply wagons, and a plan to stop trading lives for every victory. He offers a shared enemy, and a shared reckoning. Brunhilde has wanted Otto's blood for the children burned in the passes. Cassian has wanted the same for his father, and the city destroyed below the palace hill. Those debts belong to one war, even if neither side kneels to the other. A large Kronberg raiding column is already 2 days away from the low pass. Brunhilde expects to stop it by meeting force with force and losing another third of her warriors. Cassian asks only to stand beside her, show what his tools can do, and be judged afterward. He does not ask for her knee, her clan, or even her trust before earning it. Brunhilde warns that if the land emperor runs when steel fills the air, a mountain will remember. Cashin promises to stand and asks her to show him the ground where they will win. That word surprises her more than the gold, engines, or crown. He does not say he will save the Eisenwald, because only fools tell great warriors they need saving. He intends to give them leverage, sharpen their plan, and let them do what they already do best. For 2 days, Lysandra studies the low pass like another ledger filled with deadly columns. The road narrows between cliffs where a marching force must compress and lose room to maneuver. Aegea's crews hide mountain throwers on the heights and measure every angle toward the choke point. Brunhilde places warriors behind stone, while Cashin's soldiers build obstacles that make retreat nearly impossible. The raiders believe they are riding into another predictable slaughter of isolated clans. Instead, they enter a machine assembled from counting, engineering, money, courage, and carefully chosen ground. When the first Kronberg banners appear below, every lesson Cashin has gathered prepares to strike at once. The raiders charge confidently into the narrowing pass, certain the mountain clans will meet them head-on again. Lysandra waits until the entire column bunches beneath the hidden engines. And then Aegea's crews release the first stones. Boulders crash from above, shattering the front ranks and sealing the road behind the trapped force. Kronberg horses panic, soldiers collide, and an organized column becomes a knot of terror. Cashin watches the plan work, but crushed men turn his stomach regardless. This is not the clean arithmetic of maps, because every successful number contains blood. When survivors scramble toward the flanks, Brunhilde leads the Eisenwald down like an avalanche. Her warriors no longer fight desperate and outnumbered against a prepared enemy. They strike broken formations from higher ground with fresh strength and room to maneuver. Cashin joins the edge of the battle, where fleeing raiders threaten the weaker flank. He is not a legendary swordsman, and fear burns through every breath. Still, he stands, fights, and refuses to run, while Brunhilde watches across the steel. The entire raiding column collapses, with only a handful of Eisenwald wounded and none killed. For clans accustomed to burying a third of their fighters after every victory, the silence afterward feels unreal. Brunhilde walks among her living warriors and slowly understands what Cashin brought. He did not replace courage, command her people, or purchase glory with lowland gold. He gave their courage better ground, better tools, and a plan that stopped wasting it. Cashin also made himself share the danger instead of watching safely from a hill. Brunhilde tells him he stood when running would have been easier and more sensible. Cashin answers that he promised judgment, honestly earned, and the field now contains the evidence. She does not kneel, but she invites him to remain and discuss how to defend the frontier properly. That invitation matters more than any ceremonial submission could have. Cashin spends months beside the Eisenwald, turning scattered clans into the core of a professional army. Brunhilde drills every recruit until courage becomes discipline rather than uncontrolled fury. Vivint supplies wages, food, armor, horses, and contracts strong enough to keep weapons flowing. Aegea strengthens the passes with walls, towers, engines, roads, and hidden positions designed around the terrain. Lysandra builds recruitment, rotation, supply, command, and accountability into one sustainable system. Cashin makes one rule central to everything they create. No life will be spent merely to make a ruler look brave. Soldiers train hard, officers explain orders, wounded fighters receive care, and families receive real support. The Eisenwald begins seeing the Lowland Emperor as a partner who values their people, not just their blades. Ashenfeld citizens join because the army protects homes they rebuilt with their own hands. Fighters from the mountains teach them endurance, steel, and the refusal to break under pressure. The old city guard slowly becomes an army capable of defending the whole reborn realm. Brunhilde watches Cashin refuse reckless attacks, even when victory might produce a glorious story. He would rather lose an opportunity than spend 50 lives for an emperor's reputation. That restraint convinces her more deeply than bravery. In the low pass, one evening on the frontier wall, Brunhilde admits she no longer needs another battle to judge him. She has seen him build soldiers the same way he built streets, honestly, patiently, and beside the workers. Her clan, her blade, and her future are offered freely, with one warning: she will argue loudly, speak brutally, and never flatter him for a single day. Cassian answers that such honesty is exactly what his throne needs. Their marriage grows from trust proven in steel rather than courtship arranged for appearance. The crown system recognizes a bond as solid as the mountain woman who gives it. With Brunhilde's oath come the fierce clans, their steel, their training, and the military strength Cassian lacked. For the first time since his father's death, Velmar possesses every visible piece of national power. The people are healthy, the treasury grows, the fleet sails, the frontier holds, and an army stands ready. That strength finally allows Lysandra to investigate the invisible hand, attacking every success. For more than a year, she has collected sour credit, vanished stone, stirred nobles, and perfectly timed raids. None of those failures looked large enough to prove deliberate sabotage. Together, they form the pattern of one patient person inside Cassian's own government. The same hidden hand appears in older records from before the coronation. Projects under Cassian's father failed by similar accidents at exactly the worst moments. Kronberg also knew where and when to strike Aschenfeld with impossible precision 5 years earlier. Lysandra concludes that the traitor may have helped open the way for Otto's original attack. Cassian feels the old laughter return, now mixed with the possibility that someone familiar sold his father. The culprit is highly placed, trusted, old enough to have sat at the former emperor's council. He remains careful because 5 years without a capable counter taught him that nobody could trace the pattern. Lysandra smiles coldly and explains that his greatest mistake was failing to adjust for a morn. Lysandra covers the council table with 5 years of ledgers, letters, contracts, and failures, once dismissed as bad luck. The pattern only appears when every small wound is placed beside the next one. Stone vanished before wall repairs, grain moved before shortages, and credit collapsed before merchants could help. No single accident proves treason, but every accident benefits the same quiet circle of factors and clerks. Names change from page to page, yet the money repeatedly returns to accounts protected by one noble household. Vernon never touches the crimes directly because patient spiders survive by keeping distance from the struggling prey. He uses frightened merchants, indebted magistrates, disposable messengers, and nobles too proud to admit they were purchased. Cassian remembers Vernon standing beside his father during councils and offering calm advice after every manufactured disaster. He also remembers the man wearing mourning black at the funeral and speaking gently to the surviving boy. The possibility that those consoling hands helped open the gate turns grief into something sharp enough to taste. Cassian wants soldiers at Vernon's door before the next candle burns down. Lysandra refuses, because anger without complete proof would transform a traitor into a persecuted noble. The other houses would defend their own privileges, even while privately believing every accusation. Vernon would destroy records, scatter witnesses, and claim the young emperor feared anyone old enough to challenge him. They need the spider relaxed, proud, and certain that nobody has finally learned to read his web. Cassian therefore returns to public work and allows Vernon to keep watching the familiar well digger. He discusses walls, schools, and grain, while hiding the first true hunt of his reign behind ordinary council business. Vernon mistakes patience for ignorance because he has spent years teaching himself that Cassian never sees beneath surfaces. Every visible project becomes camouflage for clerks tracing payments and messengers recording who speaks to whom. The investigation begins not with an arrest, but with the false weakness placed exactly where greed can see it. They cannot accuse every noble or search every estate without driving the spider deeper underground. Instead, they will feed false information through one compromised channel and watch where the enemy appears. The bait claims part of Cassian's army will move along an exposed route at a vulnerable time. If Kronberg attacks that exact place, the leak proves which chain carries information east. Vivian begins buying messengers, clerks, factors, and cutouts inside the traitors' network. Their loyalty was never personal, because they served whoever paid them. Vivian can pay more and offers protection the hidden spider cannot guarantee. Ajia turns the supposedly vulnerable route into another carefully measured killing ground. Brunhilde prepares soldiers to become the hammer when Kronberg takes the bait. Lysandra monitors every person who receives, carries, changes, or repeats the false schedule. The raiders arrive exactly where the secret message predicted, and find an army waiting instead of exposed. Brunhilde crushes the attack, while officers capture survivors able to confirm their orders and timing. The captured reports match one specific information chain inside Aschenfeld. Viven's purchased cutouts reveal the next layer, then another, then another. Lysandra follows the thread through 4 levels of cautious intermediaries until one old name remains. Count Vernon sat beside Cassian's father, mourned at his funeral, and stayed when many nobles fled. Cassian once mistook that decision for loyalty. Remaining near the corpse gave Vernon the perfect position to keep it from rising. He sold information, delayed recovery, diverted resources, and fed weakness toward Kronberg for 5 years. He may have arranged the door through which Otto's soldiers entered on the night Cassian's father died. Viven quietly purchases the debts of 3 merchants who carried Vernon's messages without ever meeting their true master. She offers them protection, honest contracts, and enough coin to make continued silence financially ridiculous. One of those merchants is Call, still terrified by the day Cassian opened the hidden grain warehouse before a starving crowd. Call admits that the hoarding scheme came through sealed instructions and payments routed from an unnamed lord above Halvern. Aldrich recognizes the wax pattern as one once used for confidential orders inside the old emperor's private council. The discovery wounds him, because he served beside men he believed were helping Cassian's father hold the realm together. Lysandra refuses to let grief hurry the chain, and demands another independent path to the same name. Captured raiders provide that path through coded schedules describing which roads would be empty, and which towers unprepared. The codes match abbreviations found inside Vernon's harmless agricultural reports. Ajia studies the papers and notices measurements only someone with palace maps could have supplied. Brunhilde wants to drag every conspirator into daylight, but Cassian orders the smaller links watched instead of frightened. For 6 nights, soldiers follow couriers who believe the darkness still belongs to Vernon. They find a cellar beneath a wool factor's office, where messages are copied, resealed, and sent east. No letter names Vernon, yet every instruction arrives after his steward visits the same counting room. Viven replaces one courier with a man loyal to her contracts and sends the false military schedule onward unchanged. Vernon receives the bait, studies it, and chooses exactly the response Lysandra predicted. He advises Cassian to reinforce the wrong road while secretly warning Kronberg about the exposed one. Cassian listens to the advice without blinking and thanks the traitor for his concern. Vernon leaves the room, believing the boy has swallowed another poisoned kindness. Outside, Lysandra records the moment as the final voluntary act connecting him to the enemy attack. When the raiders enter the prepared pass, Brunhilde captures their commander before he can destroy his orders. The commander's packet contains payment marks, timing codes, and a promise carrying Vernon's private sign. Ajia opens a sealed tunnel beneath Vernon's estate before servants can move the archive stored there. Inside are years of copied maps, redirected shipments, purchased magistrates, and reports sent before Otto burned Aschenfeld. The spider is no longer a theory, because his entire web now lies breathing on Cassian's table. Vernon still believes himself invisible and Cassian too distracted by mud, lamps, and idealistic projects. The entire machine of the new empire quietly turns toward him before he notices anything changing. Brunhilde surrounds his estate at night with disciplined soldiers and no unnecessary violence. Ajia closes escape routes built into the old property and blocks every hidden passage. Viven peels away the paid men Vernon expects to summon. Lysandra assembles evidence so complete that justice cannot be dismissed as a young emperor's revenge. At dawn, the spider wakes to find every strand of his web cut. At dawn, disciplined soldiers escort Vernon from his estate without burning a room or striking a servant. He demands a private audience, expecting old familiarity to protect him from public examination. Cashin refuses secrecy because treason hidden for 5 years must be answered where the whole court can see. The 9 noble houses are summoned back into the restored hall that once held their insulting applause. Call, captured raiders, frightened clerks, magistrates, and Aldrich wait beneath the repaired roof. Lysandra places every ledger, seal, map, and intercepted order in chronological sequence before any accusation is spoken. Vernon arrives, confident enough to smile at men he still believes will defend their shared privileges. He claims faithful service, personal sacrifice, and loyalty proven by remaining in Ashenfeld after the sack. Cashin answers quietly, because the room already contains more truth than any raised voice could improve. He tells Vernon this will be a hearing, not a performance, decided by rank or memory. The old noble finally notices Call seated beside a merchant factor he thought had fled the city. He notices the captured commander wearing the insignia of a raid that followed the fall schedule. He notices Aldrich holding wax impressions from the former emperor's private council. He notices Aegea's copied map of the tunnel found beneath his own estate. For the first time, calculation replaces outrage inside Vernon's eyes. Every noble watching understands that the spider has entered a room where his web is already visible. Cashin orders the doors kept open so witnesses may enter and no rumor can replace what happens next. There will be no secret execution, manufactured confession, or vengeance disguised as royal necessity. There will also be no privilege allowing an ancient name to stand above evidence. The formal charges are read, and Vernon begins fighting for the identity his crimes allowed him to wear. He stands dressed as the loyal elder who remained when younger nobles abandoned the dying capital. He expects rank, memory, and performance to outweigh evidence assembled by people he spent years dismissing. First, he calls Call a coward, then the captured raiders liars, and finally Lysandra, a disgraced woman seeking revenge. Lysandra answers each insult by opening another ledger and allowing the numbers to speak without anger. Payments align with vanished grain, missing stone, delayed letters, and Kronberg movements too precise to be coincidence. Aldrich identifies the old council seals and admits before the court that loyalty made him blind to a familiar hand. Vernon tries to turn that confession against him, claiming grief has made the steward desperate for someone to blame. Cashin asks one simple question about the night his father died and the gate Kronberg crossed before dawn. For the first time, Vernon's practiced outrage arrives half a heartbeat too late. That hesitation is small, but every noble in the hall sees it. Lysandra produces the oldest map from the tunnel, marked with a route through the servants' quarter and palace wall. The route ends beside the steps where Cashin watched soldiers murder his father. Vernon claims Otto would have found another entrance, as though inevitability could erase the hand that opened this one. Cashin feels the 14-year-old inside him begging for a sword, a scream, and immediate blood. Instead, he lets Theodora's future law exist before Theodora ever enters the court. He asks witnesses to finish, permits Vernon to answer every charge, and refuses to decide from the throne alone. The nobles discover that procedure can become more frightening than rage when every escape has already been closed. Vernon finally abandons dignity and warns them Cashin will strip every ancient house once one elder is condemned. Halvern looks toward the evidence and realizes defending Vernon now means placing his own name inside the conspiracy. One by one, the nobles step away from the man who believed shared corruption would protect him forever. The judgment names treason, theft, conspiracy, unlawful killing, and deliberate starvation committed across 5 years. Cashin does not celebrate when the sentence is read, because justice cannot return his father or the winters already lost. He only promises that no future ruler will be forced to trust darkness simply because powerful men call secrecy tradition. Vernon is taken through the same doors where he once walked freely beside an emperor he betrayed. The court remains silent after he leaves, hearing the restored throne become real through restraint rather than vengeance. In the Eastern Palace, Otto receives the news with the stillness of a predator measuring a fatal mistake. His spider sat invisible beside 2 emperors and quietly poisoned recovery for half a decade. Now, Cashin has found the conspiracy, cut every thread, and exposed it without destabilizing his own court. Otto finally abandons every comforting belief about the boy he once dismissed. Cashin is no twitching corpse, lucky survivor, or sentimental child distracted by fountains. He commands a city, economy, fleet, army, general, builder, merchant, and counter working as one. For the first time in 20 years, Otto recognizes a rival instead of a victim. He orders every legion, engine, horse, and supply train in Kronberg to prepare for full war. The next attack will not be called a correction, raid, or border dispute. Otto intends to bring the complete weight of his empire and confirm the kill he neglected years ago. Otto orders every surviving channel connected to Vernon burned before Velmar can follow it farther east. Clerks disappear, safe houses empty, and frightened agents discover that tools receive no loyalty when they stop being useful. The purge protects Kronberg's remaining secrets, but blinds Otto to several regions he once watched effortlessly. Roxana has not yet joined Cashin, yet the absence of Vernon's reports already creates darkness around the old conqueror. Otto studies the final message and recognizes Lyssandra's method inside the trap. A counting mind has turned 5 years of patient sabotage into evidence strong enough to survive public judgment. He realizes Cashin is learning not only how to build power, but how to cleanse it without shattering the state. That ability makes the young emperor more dangerous than any reckless avenger charging east with an untrained army. Otto closes Vernon's name inside a drawer and begins preparing the war that will decide which philosophy survives. The spider is gone, and the man who owned the web finally steps into the open. Back in Aschenfeld, Cashin stands with Lysandra, Agia, Vivian, and Brunhilde after Vernon's fall. They marvel that 4 people who disagree constantly moved like one perfect mechanism when the moment came. Lysandra calls it a functioning government, a rarity among rulers surrounded by agreeable fools. Vivian still calls it a portfolio, merely to irritate the others. Brunhilde threatens to throw her from the wall, and Agia quietly calculates the safest angle. Cashin feels warmth beneath the argument, because none of them are isolated geniuses anymore. They have become colleagues, family, and a structure stronger than any single mind. Lysandra reviews the transformation from a ruthless coronation to a wealthy, war-ready power. The visible body of the empire appears complete, yet Agia notices a missing keystone. Walls, coin, ships, and soldiers can survive a war, but they cannot guarantee a civilization lasts afterward. Aschenfeld still lacks trusted law, public healing, and education for the children who will inherit everything. Without those softer structures, strength eventually becomes another Kronberg ruled only through fear. The empire has built a body, heart, and sword, but not the soul holding them together. Agia remembers the Sisters of the Vigil beyond the eastern hills. Their abbey preserves hospitals, schools, courts, and moral authority abandoned by the noble houses. Mother Theodora leads them with the reputation for seeing through ambition disguised as compassion. She cannot be won by profit, engineering, excitement, or promises of military victory. She values whether a ruler truly cares about ordinary lives when power offers no reward. A messenger arrives almost simultaneously with confirmation that Kronberg's full army is mustering. Brunhilde wants to march immediately and strike before Otto finishes gathering his legions. Lysandra argues that winter makes a premature offensive more dangerous to Cashin than to Kronberg. Otto needs a season to call distant forces, provision them, and move everything toward the frontier. The decisive campaign will begin when spring hardens the roads. Velmar has won winter, and Cashin chooses to spend it sharpening the sword and building the soul. An empire winning a war only to rot afterward would make every grave meaningless. The Abbey of the Vigil feels unlike every power center Cashin has entered. The builder mechanics hummed with water, Solmir roared with money, and Eisenwald rang with steel. The Abbey is quiet because careful work is happening everywhere at once. Clean wards tend the sick, poor children study letters, and honest courts hear disputes without bravos. The sisters preserved a fragment of order while the rest of Velmar collapsed around them. Mother Theodora receives Cashin with plain tea, and the calm eyes of a woman impressed by no crown. She is old enough to call emperors children, and experienced enough to mean no disrespect by it. Theodora knows about the wells, drains, mint, harbor, army, and startling resurrection of Ashenfeld. She also knows Cassian wants something, and asks him to state it without performance. Cassian has learned that every extraordinary person reveals the path through what they truly value. Lysandra valued impossible problems, Agia valued useful craft, Vivin valued the game, and Brunhilde valued proven truth. Theodora values people who remain people even when rulers speak about nations. Cassian admits he knows how to build walls, coin, ships, and military power. He does not know how to create fair courts, schools, hospitals, and a culture that outlives one reign. He asks the sisters not to serve as authority, but to build the things existing beyond authority. Citizens need healing when sickness returns, education to run future institutions, and law equal for high and low. Cassian wants a city worth defending after the coming bloodshed is finished. Theodora listens without interruption, then asks the question every ruler prefers to avoid. If law is truly equal, will Cassian allow it to bind the emperor as firmly as a beggar? Will he accept judgment when his own desire for revenge makes justice inconvenient? Cassian remembers Count Verne alive in custody, and the rage that wanted a faster ending. He answers that law protecting only rulers is merely organized force wearing robes. Theodora next asks whether schools will teach citizens to question the throne that built them. Cassian answers that an empire depending on ignorance deserves the collapse ignorance eventually brings. She asks whether hospitals will treat enemy prisoners during the war as faithfully as Velmar's own soldiers. Cassian hesitates, feels the cost, and finally says suffering does not change species beneath another banner. Theodora sees the pause, the struggle, and the honest answer reached after it. She agrees to visit Ashenfeld, but offers no promise beyond observation. The sisters travel west and begin by examining the lowest districts rather than the palace. They find clean water and paved streets, but also children unable to read, and families afraid of noble courts. Theodora insists that learning, healing, and law must spread district by district, like the wells once did. Schools open and plain, warm buildings where workers' children bend over slates for the first time. Adults stand outside listening, because many never learned the letters their children now speak aloud. Hospitals follow, staffed by trained sisters who teach apprentices instead of guarding their methods. Illness no longer means waiting at home until fever wins. Knowledge multiplies because Theodora, like Agia, understands that secrets serving only keepers eventually become graves. The deepest change arrives through courts applying the same law to noble, merchant, soldier, and beggar. A common woman brings a claim against a lord who once could have ordered her beaten. The evidence favors her, the court rules for her, and the emperor refuses every demand to reverse it. Ashenfeld's nobles rage because equality feels like oppression to people accustomed to standing above consequence. The ordinary citizens can barely believe a law now exists to protect them from the powerful. Their gratitude changes into trust, something stronger than dependence on walls or grain. Theodora explains that defended people may flee when the walls crack. People given justice will stand because the city belongs to them from the inside. A fair court can be worth more than a legion when war tests what citizens truly value. Lysandra tries to measure schools, healed patients, and public trust, then admits the most valuable result resists numbers. The empire is no longer just surviving, trading, and preparing for war. It is teaching, healing, judging, and creating lives worth protecting across generations. Cassian visits a classroom where a 7-year-old girl slowly reads a complete sentence. Her astonished pride strikes him harder than the roar at the aqueduct. 2 years earlier, her family might have drunk poisoned water in a dark tenement. Now, she sits warm, safe, fed, and capable of entering a future her parents never imagined. Cassian understands that this child, more than revenge, is the purpose behind every stone. Theodora sees that understanding and knows his concern for ordinary people is not theater. She offers herself and the vigil's work through an oath of shared purpose rather than romance. Their marriage enlarges the good they can accomplish together and asks nothing beyond continued responsibility. The crown system recognizes a deep, clear bond rooted in service rather than desire or political convenience. With Theodora comes the soul of the empire, its learning, healing, law, and loyalty freely earned. Near winter's end, Cassian walks alone through the district where the first well changed everything. The streets are paved, fountains run, lamps burn, and children leave school without fearing darkness. He watches the little girl read again and allows himself one quiet moment of emotion. Whatever the coming war costs, this warm room already proves that rebuilding was worth the pain. What Cassian does not know is Otto is studying reports about a people who now love their ruler. Armies can be defeated, yet citizens defending justice, health, and their children's future are harder to break. The conqueror knows privately he has never misjudged an enemy so completely. Still, force has rewarded him for 20 years, and he cannot imagine another philosophy defeating it. He prepares the legions for spring while designing one final move before open war. Otto will send his daughter Iris to Ashenfeld as a formal peace offering and proposed bride. If Cassian refuses her, he can be painted as a warmonger, rejecting reconciliation. If Cassian accepts, Kronberg places royal blood, eyes, and perhaps a knife inside the enemy household. To Otto, his daughter is simply another piece whose value depends on where he places her. News of the offer freezes Cassian's war council. Brunhilde calls it an obvious trap and wants the carriage turned around at the border. Lysandra sees the political cost hidden inside both acceptance and refusal. Theodora reminds them that before being a trap, hostage, princess, or spy, Iris remains a person. Cassian orders respectful quarters prepared and promises to judge her by choices rather than blood. Before Iris arrives, another woman enters the palace without permission, warning, or visible effort. Cassian finds Roxana sitting in his private chair with the boot on the desk and letters in her hand. She has bypassed every guard, read military minutes, studied treasury records, and entered unnoticed for hours. Roxana calmly explains that if she served Kronberg, the emperor and his war would already be dead. She is a professional spy, information broker, infiltrator, and knife whose loyalty has always been contractual. At present, she serves nobody, which makes Cassian the most interesting available employer. Kronberg winning through superior size would be predictable, dull, and professionally unimpressive. Helping a resurrected corpse defeat the greatest power on the continent would become a legendary piece of work. Roxana also carries a personal grudge because Otto's agents once tried to kill her after a contract. She offers competence instead of noble language, and asks to be pointed toward the enemy. Cassian appreciates the honesty, but the system cannot reward a relationship based only on payment. He hires her anyway because soldiers marching blind into Kronberg would die no matter how pure his intentions. Roxana builds an intelligence network with terrifying speed. Within weeks, she maps legions, commanders, fortresses, supply routes, resentful vassals, weak garrisons, and political fractures. She discovers that Kronberg's greatest defense is also its most exploitable weakness. Every rank believes the empire invincible because none of them has ever experienced meaningful defeat. Commanders plan for enemies already frightened, already cautious, and already halfway broken. Arrogance creates blind spots wider than any breached wall. Roxana and Cassian enjoy the same dangerous pleasure in turning certainty against the person holding it. They design false reports, phantom movements, misleading rumors, and choices that appear accidental only from outside. Professional respect grows into trust because neither pretends the knife's edge is something gentler. Roxana finally offers an oath freely, not because the contract requires it, but because the game became their cause. The crown system accepts the sharp, clear bond of two people dealing honestly in dangerous things. Velmar gains the eyes of a realm and the secrets needed to stop fighting in darkness. Then Iris arrives in a black Kronberg carriage through gates rebuilt from the ruins her father created. The entire court watches the daughter of Cassian's greatest enemy step onto Ashenfeld stone. She is young, composed, beautiful, and disciplined enough to reveal almost nothing. Her eyes remain deliberately empty because showing emotion in Otto's court always created another weapon against her. Iris delivers perfect words about peace, duty, and honor, without sounding as though any belong to her. Cassian sees the man who killed his father every time he looks at her family name. The old rage rises beside a colder calculation. He has become skilled enough to trust too quickly. Iris notices the rebuilt gates first, because her father's banners once passed through their ruins without resistance. Workers pause to watch her carriage, but nobody throws stones or spits at the royal crest. Their restraint frightens her more than hatred would, because discipline suggests Cassian truly controls the anger Otto created. Inside the palace, servants offer clean rooms without searching her belongings in public. She assumes hidden watchers are everywhere and begins cataloging exits, keys, schedules, and possible poisons by instinct. Cassian greets her without touching her hand longer than ceremony requires. He asks whether the road was difficult, and Iris searches the harmless question for the blade concealed beneath it. Otto taught her that every conversation is a contest whose loser reveals what the winner can later use. Cassian's court feels more dangerous because people disagree openly and apparently survive the experience. Lysandra challenges military estimates in front of everyone, while Vivien laughs at a duke who overprices his loyalty. Brunhilde interrupts the emperor twice and receives neither punishment nor a colder seat at dinner. Agia ignores rank entirely when explaining why a proposed tower would collapse under winter ice. Theodora asks Iris whether she slept, not whether Otto sent instructions inside her luggage. Roxana watches from a window with the expression of someone who has already found 3 concealed knives. Iris understands that these women are not ornaments arranged around Cassian's power. They possess power of their own, and remain because leaving appears to be a real choice. That freedom makes the palace unlike any place Iris has lived, and therefore impossible to interpret safely. She responds with perfect manners, controlled breathing, and answers polished until they reveal nothing alive. Cassian mistakes the composure for strength before recognizing it as armor worn too long to remove easily. Neither of them yet understands how much damage their first strategic decision is about to expose. Otto sent a piece, so Cassian imagines turning that piece against its owner. Marriage could secure a hostage, expose Kronberg's intention, humiliate Otto, and draw system resources before war. The idea is clever, strategic, and a betrayal of everything Cassian built. He nevertheless offers marriage within days, framing the choice to himself as necessary statecraft. Iris accepts because refusal was never truly included among the options her father gave her. They marry in a formal ceremony filled with witnesses and almost no genuine choice. Cassian thinks he has captured Otto's weapon and protected Aschenfeld from the political trap. The crown system answers with the smallest reward he has ever received. Iris stands with him at only 5%, a marriage of ice built on strategy and resignation. Cassian has taken her as a weapon, while she is surrendered as a piece, with nowhere else to move. Hatred is not loyalty, calculation is not truth, and a coerced answer is not a freely given oath. The system refuses to pay for a lie merely because royal witnesses call it marriage. Its judgment lands harder than any public humiliation Cassian has endured. Every true foundation of his empire came from seeing another person's value and allowing free choice. With Iris, he repeated Otto's philosophy and treated a human being as a tool. For one cold moment, the emperor fighting, Kronberg became exactly like the man he hated. Cassian looks at his new wife and understands he has wronged her before learning anything about her. After the ceremony, Cassian spends the night waiting for the system to confirm that his calculation succeeded. Instead, pale letters display a bond weaker than any friendship formed beside a well, ledger, or battlefield. 5% reduces the glorious royal marriage to a truth nobody in the hall wanted spoken. Iris agreed because Otto commanded her, Cassian proposed because strategy rewarded him, and witnesses supplied respectable clothing. Nothing inside the oath belongs freely to the two people whose lives it claims to bind. Cashin initially searches for a technical correction, another promise, or some gesture capable of increasing the number. The instinct disgusts him because it treats Iris's heart like a locked treasury, acquiring the correct key. He remembers Otto placing cities, soldiers, and children wherever they produce the greatest advantage. The difference between them cannot be better technique while pursuing the same ownership. At dawn, Cashin asks Iris to meet without advisors, guards, wine, or ceremonial language. She arrives expecting interrogation and prepares several convincing lies about loyalty to her new husband. Cashin offers no question and begins with an apology that includes the exact wrong he committed. He says he saw Otto's daughter, Kronberg's secrets, and a political answer before seeing the woman trapped among them. He admits the marriage cannot become honest while he keeps pretending her acceptance was free. Iris asks what punishment follows if she never loves him, never trusts him, and never gives him one useful secret. Cashin answers that none follows, because affection demanded under threat would only deepen the original lie. She may close her door, write private letters, reject his company, and speak against his decisions before the council. Security rules will protect the city, but those rules will be written and applied openly rather than invented around her. Iris studies him for the hidden bargain and finds only shame disciplined into a promise. She does not forgive him, yet the first crack appears in her certainty that every ruler lies about mercy. Cashin leaves without asking whether the conversation changed anything. For the first time, Iris watches power remove itself from the room instead of waiting to be obeyed. The system remains at 5%, proving that one correct apology cannot purchase the trust. Years of coercion destroyed. Cashin feels relieved by the refusal, because easy reward would let him mistake insight for transformation. He begins the slower work of becoming safe, without demanding that Iris notice immediately. The ceremony cannot be undone, but Cashin can prevent its coercion from becoming the daily law of their marriage. He writes Iris's freedoms into household rules that servants, guards, and advisors are required to follow. She receives her own keys, seal, correspondence, chest, and authority to dismiss anyone entering without permission. None of those protections require gratitude, affection, information, or a performance of peace. Iris assumes this kindness hides another strategy, because every kindness in her father's court carried a price. Cashin does not demand belief, because he remembers how Lysandra began with only curiosity. He begins treating Iris as a person without waiting for the system to reward him. At meals, he asks what she enjoys rather than what secrets she knows. She has no answer at first, because nobody in Kronberg ever considered her preferences important. Cashin gives her access to the library and discovers she understands history, diplomacy, languages, and court behavior. Iris expects every opinion to become evidence against her, so she offers carefully polished nothing. Theodora speaks with her without interrogation and recognizes the habits of a lifelong hostage. Agia invites her to examine city plans because structures provide safer conversation than family. Vivin challenges her to games and loses just often enough to prove the victories are real. Brunhilde remains suspicious, but refuses cruelty towards someone who has not chosen Otto's crimes. Lysandra watches for deception while still addressing Iris as an intelligent adult. Roxana, who trusts almost nobody, notices that the princess behaves like a prisoner trained to appear loyal. Slowly, Iris learns that disagreement in Aschenfeld does not lead to punishment. She sees Cashin's wives argue loudly, challenge the emperor openly, and leave the room, still respected. No one bows to fear, and no one becomes smaller to protect Cashin's pride. Iris begins speaking in complete thoughts rather than perfect court phrases. She tells Cashin that Otto never loved the children he produced, only the uses assigned to them. Her brothers became commanders, cousins became hostages, and she became a diplomatic blade kept polished for exchange. She expected Cashin either to use her more cleverly or punish her for being difficult to use. Instead, he apologizes without asking her to forgive him quickly. The apology unsettles her because Otto taught that rulers admit mistakes only when planning another trap. Cashin proves it by changing his behavior consistently while receiving nothing in return. The 5% does not rise through gifts, speeches, or forced intimacy. It waits while two wounded people learn whether the other can be trusted with an unguarded truth. Outside the palace, spring approaches, and Kronberg's legions gather beyond the frontier. Inside, Cassian faces a quieter campaign against the damage Otto placed inside his own daughter. Every day, he chooses patience instead of extraction, honesty instead of manipulation, and respect instead of ownership. Iris begins, noticing that the emperor, who once treated her as a piece, is willing to become better than his mistake. That possibility frightens her more than hatred, because hope creates something real that can finally be lost. Weeks pass before Iris stops sitting where she can see every door. The change is small enough that only Roxana notices and says nothing. At meals, Cassian asks about books, music, weather, and cities she visited under guard. Iris gradually admits she likes old diplomatic histories because dead negotiators cannot punish readers for understanding them. Agia brings her bridge plans written in 3 languages, and discovers the princess can identify mistranslated load terms. Vivin challenges her with trade disputes where every answer creates a different enemy. Brunhilde teaches her to hold a short blade, then complains that royal tutors trained elegance instead of survival. Theodora gives her work translating medical records, allowing usefulness without demanding confession. Lysandra invites her into calculations and corrects her exactly as she corrects Cassian. Equal criticism feels strangely intimate to someone raised where rank changed the meaning of truth. Iris tests the freedom by disagreeing with a minor policy during council. Nobody freezes. Cassian asks for her reasoning, and the final decision adopts part of her objection. That evening, she waits for retaliation that never arrives. The next test is sharper, because she tells Cassian his proposed border message sounds like Otto pretending generosity. The room goes silent for one breath, then Cassian asks her to rewrite it. Iris returns with language offering choice, instead of dressing pressure as honor. Cassian sends her version under his own seal, and publicly credits the correction. A life built around invisible punishment begins, discovering that honesty can change outcomes without destroying the speaker. Iris also sees Cassian fail outside council and apologize to a quartermaster whose warning he dismissed. The Emperor's authority survives the admission, contradicting everything Otto taught about weakness. Trust grows in these ordinary moments, not through jewels, declarations, or forced nights behind a royal door. Cassian sleeps elsewhere until Iris invites him to remain, and even then he accepts distance without wounded pride. Their marriage begins, becoming a relationship only after both stop using the marriage itself as proof. The 5% rises slowly, then pauses whenever fear returns, honest in every direction. Cassian learns to value the pauses because truth that moves freely cannot be commanded toward a convenient ending. Iris first chooses trust during a war council where Cassian asks for an opinion nobody expects her to give. The generals assume Otto will attack the frontier directly with overwhelming force. Iris quietly explains that her father prefers victory, proving his enemies foolish before proving them weak. He will stage obvious pressure at the border while preparing a deeper movement through a supposedly secure corridor. The room goes silent, and Cassian asks her to continue without demanding proof of loyalty. She maps Otto's habits, vanities, trusted commanders, false feints, and punishments for independent thought. Roxana compares the information against her network and finds every detail consistent. Together, the spy and the princess create a picture no outsider or insider could produce alone. Roxana knows where Kronberg moves. Iris knows why Otto chooses each movement. Cassian does not praise Iris as a useful weapon. He thanks her for trusting people who once had every reason to fear her. That distinction matters because it recognizes the courage of her choice rather than the value of her secrets. Iris begins volunteering information instead of waiting to be questioned. She reveals which vassals hate Otto, which fortresses are neglected, and which supply routes depend on one bridge. She describes the hidden weakness in the capital and the arrogance shaping every major decision. Each disclosure cuts another cord tying her life to the father who never saw her. Cassian listens without celebrating her pain or demanding that she hate Otto more cleanly. He understands that betraying a cruel parent can still feel like tearing away part of oneself. Their conversations move beyond war into childhood spent inside walls, while powerful men decided their futures. Cassian remembers hiding as his father died, while Iris remembers learning never to cry where Otto could see. Both were shaped by rulers who treated human vulnerability as something dangerous. One lost a loving father to cruelty. The other survived a cruel father by disappearing behind perfect manners. They recognize wounds. The other does not need explain. The bond grows not through sudden passion, but through the relief of finally being seen without being used. Iris chooses Cassian's cause because Ashenfeld represents everything her father's empire denied. It treats workers as citizens, advisors as equals, law as restraint, and loyalty as something freely earned. She no longer helps merely to survive inside a foreign court. She wants the world Cassian built to defeat the world Otto forced upon her. During the decisive war council, Iris recognizes the corridor marked as safe on every Velmar map. Otto used that route during childhood inspections because its villages depended on one old bridge and one obedient governor. He will threaten the frontier openly, then push elite troops through the corridor while everyone watches Brunhilde's passes. Revealing the plan means exposing memories Otto entrusted only to family. Iris grips the table until her fingers ache, aware that the next sentence may destroy the last claim she has to being his daughter. Cassian notices the struggle and stops the council before anyone pressures her. He says the army will plan with what she freely chooses to give, and accept the risk of what she keeps. The permission to remain silent removes the final excuse for silence. Iris returns to the map and describes the bridge, the governor, the commander Otto favors, and the signal beginning the march. Roxana confirms movement around the corridor within 2 days. Lysandra redesigns the campaign, while Cassian orders protection prepared for villages Otto intends to use as cover. Later, Cassian finds her alone, grieving, a father who never protected the child now betraying his army. He sits beside her until she says the secret aloud. Some part of her still wants Otto to choose her over victory. Cassian admits some part of him still wants his dead father to open the servant's passage and say the last 7 years were a nightmare. Iris gives Cassian the remaining palace plans that night, including the neglected foundation beneath Kronberg's western wall. He agrees, before asking how the plans can be used. That order of concern convinces Iris her knowledge will end Otto's cruelty rather than extend it under another banner. The bond deepens because Cassian accepts both the weapon she can provide and the human limit she places around it. Iris chooses the coming war with clear eyes, knowing victory may save thousands and break the only home she knew. For the first time, sacrifice belongs to her instead of the man who trained her to be sacrificed. The crown system changes without warning during one late-night planning session. The marriage of Ice becomes the deepest bond Cassian has ever formed. Iris now stands with him freely, giving her whole trust after discovering a life beyond being a piece. The system calls it truth, built from a lie, transformed, stronger because both confronted what was false. Resources pour into Velmar in a flood greater than every previous oath. Yet the gold matters less than the moral defeat hidden inside Otto's own strategy. He sent his daughter to become a knife inside Cassian's house. By treating her as a human being, Cassian turned the knife around without forcing her hand. Otto's contempt for people created the very betrayal now exposing every weakness in Kronberg. When reports reveal Iris has stopped sending information east, Otto finally understands what happened. He gave her rank, jewels, and a royal name, but never the dignity of being seen. Cassian gave her that dignity within weeks, and gained a loyalty Otto could never command. For one brief moment, the old conqueror recognizes the flaw beneath his entire empire. People treated as pieces eventually choose the first person who allows them to become whole. Otto stands at the edge of changing, and then retreats into the philosophy that made him powerful. Love cannot stop steel, he tells himself, and secrets cannot defeat legions. He promises to punish Iris as a broken asset after Ashenfeld falls. The doubt remains under his certainty because he knows Cassian understands human beings in a way he never did. In the restored Great Hall, Cassian gathers the complete government built across 2 impossible years. Lysandra stands beside maps and ledgers, turning vision into sequence and sequence into action. Agia represents water, roads, engines, fortifications, ships, and the useful bones of the realm. Vivin commands coin, trade, supply, contracts, markets, and the economic river feeding every campaign. Brunhilde leads the army with discipline, honesty, mountain steel, and the trust of soldiers. Theodora holds law, learning, healing, and the public loyalty in victory worth its cost. Roxana brings eyes, hidden roots, deception, enemy fractures, and the power of knowing before acting. Iris brings Otto's mind, Kronberg's secrets, and the courage of choosing a new future over inherited fear. The nobles who once applauded Cassian's funeral now stand silently before the power they failed to imagine. Lysandra gives the final accounting in the hall that once had no roof. Otto receives the silence from Iris before he receives proof of her betrayal. The missing reports disturb him because she was trained to send information even while frightened, watched, or ill. When false details finally arrive, Roxana recognizes the code and turns each message into another trap. Otto realizes his daughter is not merely refusing him, but actively shaping the enemy's understanding of his mind. He orders her name removed from family records and announces that Kronberg has no disloyal princess. The gesture attempts to make abandonment look like imperial choice. Alone, he remembers Iris watching him as a child with carefully empty eyes he once praised as discipline. He understands those eyes were not loyalty, but a person disappearing because being visible was unsafe. The insight survives only a moment before pride converts pain into another order for punishment. By spring, father and daughter stand on opposite sides of a war built from everything he refused to see. 2 years ago, Cassian possessed 40 days of grain, 11 witnesses, and a crown worth almost nothing. Now, Velmar has a healthy population, overflowing treasury, fleet, army, fortified frontier, and cleansed court. Its soldiers carry better steel, its commanders possess better information, and its citizens fight for chosen lives. Kronberg still has more men, but Velmar's forces are better supplied, better led, and harder to break. 7 brilliant minds are working together, while Otto permits nobody near him to think freely. For the first time, Lysandra runs every possible sum, and finds Velmar stronger where strength truly matters. Cassian listens to the proof, and feels 7 years of laughter waiting behind his ribs. He tells the hall that survival was never the deepest reason for rebuilding. 5 years before his coronation, Otto burned Aschenfeld, killed his father, and laughed before leaving. Cassian heard that laugh from inside the wall, and carried it through every night afterward. Every well, drain, coin, wall, ship, school, and sword became part of the answer. The moment has come to deliver that answer on Kronberg's own ground. They will not wait for Otto to bring war through fields their people fought to restore. Velmar will march first, seize the initiative, and force the old empire to react. Before the army moves, Lysandra makes every leader state her responsibility and the failure that would ruin everyone else. Vivin must keep food moving even if roads close and contractors panic. Agia must ensure engines, bridges, and siege tools survive travel through thawing ground. Brunhilde must prevent courage from becoming waste when soldiers finally see Kronberg banners. Roxana must create uncertainty without allowing her own lies to confuse Velmar's commanders. Iris must predict Otto while remembering he can change when humiliation becomes unbearable. Theodora must protect law in places where anger will constantly offer faster answers. Cassian must decide among them without confusing final authority with superior knowledge. Each woman also names what she needs from the others before the campaign can succeed. The conversation exposes competing deadlines, hidden assumptions, and shortages no heroic speech could solve. Vivin wants faster movement, while Agia warns the engines will break if roads are rushed. Brunhilde wants wider scouting, while Roxana insists visible scouts will destroy the deception. Iris predicts Otto will punish towns suspected of helping Velmar, forcing Theodora to prepare evacuation routes. Lysandra changes the sequence until every compromise supports the next operation, rather than weakening it. Cassian watches disagreement become a stronger plan, and remembers the nobles who once mistook silence for unity. The final map contains no glorious arrow pointing straight toward Otto's capital. It contains food depots, hospital routes, false camps, bridge crews, protected villages, and several ways to retreat without collapse. Brunhilde calls it the least romantic war plan she has ever seen. Lysandra answers that romance is rarely asked to bury the soldiers it wastes. With the roles clear, Cassian gives the order, and the whole machine begins moving. Cassian draws his sword in the Great Hall for the first time. He names the coming campaign not defense, survival, or conquest, but reckoning. The response is nothing like the thin applause at his coronation. Soldiers, citizens, advisors, and nobles roar until the restored roof shakes above them. The army leaves Ashenfeld during the first hard days of spring. It is smaller than Kronberg's host, but it moves as the complete expression of everything Velmar built. Cassian rides at the head while understanding he is not the single genius winning this war. His true skill is holding 7 masters together and aiming their different strengths toward one purpose. Roxana rides ahead unseen, blinding Kronberg's scouts and filling their reports with deliberate errors. False columns appear on roads Velmar will never use. Phantom delays convince Otto that Cassian advances cautiously with half his real numbers. Iris predicts which lies her father will accept, because each one flatters his contempt for the young emperor. Otto expects a defensive builder, afraid to risk the city he spent years raising. Cassian therefore moves faster, bolder, and deeper than any cautious enemy in Otto's imagination. Lysandra designs the campaign like the pyramid that once rescued Ashenfeld. Every action comes in the correct order and creates the conditions required for the next. She refuses the single massive frontal battle Otto's larger army expects to win. Instead, she plans to starve, blind, divide, misdirect, and break the legions before steel decides anything. Roxana sends different marching dates through separate channels to discover which Kronberg commanders receive each rumor. Otto shifts units toward 3 false threats, revealing how quickly his orders move and which generals he trusts most. Iris reads those responses like expressions on her father's face. A delayed cavalry column means irritation, while a recalled reserve means genuine fear. Viven's agents buy not only grain, but leather, nails, lamp oil, medicine, and replacement horses. Kronberg quartermasters discover that every ordinary item required by a great army has become scarce at once. Some contractors accept Viven's money, while others simply decide Otto's promises look less reliable than silver already offered. The resulting shortages spread suspicion through camps, where officers have always survived by blaming weaker men. Aegea's road crews travel behind false merchant wagons and reinforce bridges before the army reaches them. When one bridge is burned, prepared timber and measured fittings replace the span before Otto hears. The delay succeeded. Theodora's sisters establish marked shelters in villages along the route. Cassian announces those shelters are neutral for children, wounded people, and civilians from either side. Kronberg propaganda calls the promise a trick until enemy deserters receive treatment and return alive to describe it. Every humane decision becomes strategic, because Otto built a system unable to believe mercy can remain disciplined. Brunhilde rotates troops so mountain fighters teach city recruits without grinding either force into exhaustion. She also forbids songs mocking Kronberg conscripts, reminding soldiers that the tyrant is the target, not hungry boys under his banner. Cassian rides among units without staging danger merely to create a heroic story. He listens to complaints about boots, rations, officers, and fear because armies fail through ignored ordinary problems. By the time Otto understands Velmar's real speed, the smaller force has crossed ground he expected to hold for weeks. The campaign advances through preparation, not miracle, and that truth steadies Cassian more than pale gold ever did. Viven opens the first front without drawing a sword. Her agents buy grain and fodder along Kronberg's supply routes before imperial quartermasters arrive. She pays contractors more than Otto offers simply to delay, miscount, or fail at decisive moments. An army with greater numbers becomes a greater hunger when its supply system begins collapsing. Kronberg's soldiers march toward battle, already rationing bread and weakening horses. Vivin smiles over the reports and reminds Cashin that money is another kind of siege engine. The sea becomes the second front when Aschenfeld's fleet sails against ports Otto considered untouchable. Cashin forbids burning towns or terrorizing civilians, because he will not imitate the original sack. The warship seize docks, cut coastal supply, and land Brunhilde's fastest troops behind the frontier. Otto wakes to find his carefully arranged defense facing the wrong direction. The timid enemy he prepared to crush does not exist anywhere except inside his own assumptions. By the time Kronberg understands the real campaign, Lysandra has already forced every imperial strength into the wrong place. The decisive battlefield lies where Iris predicted Otto would commit his main force. Days before the legions arrive, Aegea's engineers transform the ground into a measured killing field. Mountain throwers hide behind ridges with every range marked and every angle tested. Ditches, barriers, false lanes, and reinforced positions guide the enemy toward the worst possible advance. Brunhilde drills her soldiers to wait through the first impact, instead of chasing glory too early. Lysandra coordinates fleet reports, supply failures, scout deception, and infantry movement as one connected sequence. Theodora's hospitals follow behind the army, ready to treat Velmar soldiers and captured enemies alike. Her presence reminds every commander that victory does not cancel the law they claim to defend. Roxana ensures Otto sees a weakness exactly where Cashin has prepared the strongest trap. Iris predicts her father will attack it, because refusing would mean admitting the young emperor understood him. Otto commits his main legions despite tired horses, late wagons, and warnings from frightened officers. His commanders obey because independent judgment has never been safe inside Kronberg. The imperial formations advance across open ground with banners high and confidence inherited from 20 years of victories. That is when Aegea's engines release. The first volley does not win the battle, because disciplined legions close gaps and continue climbing through broken stone. Aegea orders crews to adjust range rather than celebrate the damage. Her second battery targets the officers, forcing crowded formations into the exposed lanes. Roxana releases a captured signal, convincing one Kronberg reserve that orders have changed. The reserve turns toward the wrong ridge and collides with wagons already retreating from Vivin's supply collapse. Dust rises across the field until commanders can no longer see whether the movement is retreat, reinforcement, or panic. Iris identifies the banner of Otto's most stubborn general and predicts he will attack again rather than report failure. Lysandra allows the attack to deepen, resisting Brunhilde's request to strike immediately. Every step forward carries the legions farther from support and closer to the hidden ditches. Cashin hears men screaming beneath stone, and must remember that patience now prevents greater slaughter later. When the imperial center reaches the marked ground, Aegea changes from scattered fire to a concentrated storm. That is when Aegea's engines release together, turning measured angles into thunder across the entire ridge. Shield walls buckle, horses rear, and commands disappear beneath impacts, arriving faster than order can recover. Brunhilde still waits because broken formations can become dangerous mobs if struck before escape routes are controlled. Theodora's runners mark surrender paths with white cloth so frightened soldiers can drop weapons without being cut down. Kronberg officers tear some markers away, needing their men trapped between obedience and death. Cashin orders arrows aimed at those officers rather than the soldiers trying to flee. The distinction travels through Velmar's ranks and prevents anger from becoming indiscriminate killing. At last, Lysandra lowers one hand, and Brunhilde releases the infantry. Mountain shields hit the shaken center while Aschenfeld's spears close the lanes leading toward civilian villages. The clash becomes intimate, loud, and ugly in ways no map can contain. Cashin sees a young city soldier freeze before his first kill, and another pull him behind a shield. He sees an Eisenwald veteran spare a wounded conscript who has already thrown down his sword. He also sees Velmar fighters fall despite every advantage Seven Minds created. No plan removes death. It only refuses to spend more lives than the objective requires. Brunhilde changes direction when a Kronberg flank begins folding sooner than Iris predicted. Cassian allows independent command, so she acts before approval can travel through 3 messengers. Her maneuver seals the opening before Otto's cavalry can exploit it. The battle turns not at one heroic blow, but through hundreds of trusted decisions made faster than fear. By sunset, the invincible legions are no longer asking how to win, but where surrender remains possible. Only after white surrender markers spread across the field does Brunhilde halt the forward pressure. Her soldiers open lanes where broken Kronberg units can disarm without being cut down from behind. Theodora's healers move between uniforms, treating wounds according to urgency rather than allegiance. Prisoners are separated from officers who tried to force them back into collapsing formations. Commanders accused of killing surrendering men are bound for later judgment instead of executed in anger. Cassian sees how quickly victory could become slaughter if discipline weakened for even a minute. One untouched Kronberg reserve attempts a desperate counterattack from beyond the eastern ridge. Roxana identifies the movement through a signal her agents planted inside the reserve's command chain. Iris predicts the general will aim for Cassian's banner, hoping one dead emperor can reverse the whole day. Lysandra shifts the reserve line before the attack leaves cover. Agia pivots 2 engines toward the ridge while keeping the hospital road outside their range. Brunhilde sends fresh mountain troops across the general's escape route instead of meeting him head-on. The counterattack finds empty ground, falling stone, and steel already waiting at its rear. Its surviving soldiers surrender before twilight, ending the final organized resistance on the field. Silence arrives unevenly as isolated clashes stop and frightened men realize nobody is ordering another charge. Velmar soldiers call for missing friends, while Kronberg conscripts ask whether water will be given to prisoners. Theodora answers by sending the same buckets to both lines. Brunhilde walks the captured ground and marks every place where the dead must be recovered before morning. Cassian remains on the command height until every unit reports and every surrender lane is secured. The victory produces no single cheer, only exhausted knowledge that the larger army has finally broken. Messengers ride toward Kronberg carrying fragments of a defeat Otto's certainty cannot yet assemble. His coast is cut, his supplies are gone, and his main force no longer exists as an army. The first reports of collapse reach Otto before darkness fully covers the field. In Otto's field headquarters, messengers arrive faster than he can deny them. The coast is compromised. The main supply road is closed, and the enemy was never where reports placed it. His legions are breaking on ground chosen by the young ruler he considered incapable of bold attack. Otto demands to know how a boy with half his army achieved this. The cold, honest part of his mind finally provides the answer. Cassian does not have half an army. He has 7 masters and a nation. Otto surrounded himself with tools selected for obedience, because brilliant people threatened his control. Cassian gathered brilliant people, allowed disagreement, and gained everything their free minds could create together. Kronberg commanders cannot adapt because Otto punished initiative for 20 years. Velmar's commanders act with confidence because Cassian built trust instead of fear. Kronberg soldiers obey until terror exceeds discipline. Velmar's citizens hold because running would surrender the lives, rights, and futures they fought to create. Otto recognizes that fear gave him instruments, while loyalty gave Cassian partners. But then, the realization arrives too late to save the battlefield. Kronberg's central formation collapses, then the flanks follow, and surviving commanders surrender or flee. Cassian refuses to order a massacre of men already dropping weapons. Theodora's law applies immediately, protecting prisoners from revenge, despite years of hatred. Brunhilde accepts the order because discipline separates reckoning from slaughter. Roxana sends false retreat routes through enemy channels, driving remaining legions away from the capital instead of toward it. Viven's fleet blocks reinforcement by sea and begins feeding liberated towns rather than stripping them. Iris contacts vassal lords who hate Otto and offers freedom instead of replacing one master with another. Several gates open without battle because people believe Cashin's promises after hearing how he rules Ashenfeld. Lysandra keeps the campaign moving before Otto can rebuild a defensive line. The siege of Kronberg's capital tests Cashin differently, because time now favors the army outside the walls. Vivin can starve the fortress, yet the civilians trapped inside will suffer before Otto's private stores empty. Brunhilde proposes a direct assault only after admitting the cost could reach thousands. Agia offers a slower breach through the neglected foundation Iris revealed. Roxana warns Otto is spreading rumors that Cashin plans to massacre the city once the gate opens. Theodora argues every day of hunger makes that lie easier to believe. Cashin chooses Agia's breach while ordering food. Messages launched over the walls with surrender guarantees. Otto burns several messages publicly and arrests citizens caught reading the rest. The repression creates the unrest Lysandra needs, but Cashin refuses to provoke riots that would leave civilians between two armies. Iris records a message naming palace officials who can surrender districts without surrendering to revenge. Her voice crossing the wall breaks Otto's claim that Cashin murdered or imprisoned her. Servants and minor guards begin moving families away from the western quarter before Agia opens the ground. When water softens the foundation, engineers hear stone shifting beneath streets still filled with sleeping people. Cashin delays the breach until Roxana confirms the quarter has been cleared. The pause costs military surprise, but prevents the collapse from burying households. Brunhilde accepts the lost advantage without complaint, proving the army now serves the lore rather than victory alone. The wall falls before dawn, and Velmar troops enter through dust, under orders repeated by every officer. No fire, no theft, no private vengeance, and no punishment based on a family name. The capital expects another Ashenfeld, and instead witnesses disciplined soldiers opening routes toward hospitals. Otto loses the city before Cashin reaches the palace because terror no longer controls what its people believe. Once the breach is secured, Agia's crews brace damaged buildings before the surrounding streets can collapse. Theodora's sisters establish treatment stations inside temples Otto had reserved for military officers. Roxana guides small units through servant passages, avoiding broad avenues prepared for desperate resistance. Iris sends messages to watch captains whose families live inside the districts they are ordered to burn. Several captains surrender their posts after Cashin guarantees public trials instead of revenge killings. Citizens watch Velmar soldiers carry injured Kronberg children toward hospitals under guarded banners. Some families open cellars and offer water after seeing payment given for bread, rather than food seized by force. Officers punish the first attempted theft before frightened residents can decide discipline is only theater. Otto's story about invading savages weakens each time ordinary conduct contradicts it. The old emperor orders the palace guard to hold while the rest of the capital becomes impossible to command. Retreating secret police attempt to burn archives containing names of prisoners and stolen property. Roxana reaches the record rooms first and preserves evidence needed to return thousands of lives from official disappearance. Lysandra establishes temporary district councils so food, water, and order do not depend on military improvisation. Brunhilde divides the army between the palace approach and civilian protection, refusing to treat safety as secondary work. Cashin rides through the open streets without triumphal music, banners lowered beneath windows full of fear. He sees craftsmen, mothers, old people, and children who had no part in Otto's decision 7 years earlier. A small boy hides behind a fountain and watches the foreign emperor pass without understanding why nobody is burning his home. Cashin remembers being another hidden child while soldiers crossed his own palace toward a waiting father. The memory makes revenge feel close, physical, and dangerously simple. He repeats the order that no civilian will pay for Otto's crimes, even if resistance continues around the throne. By afternoon, every district beyond the palace has surrendered or opened its gates to relief crews. Only Otto's inner guard remains, defending the Golden Hall, where the old conqueror waits for Cashin. Resistance continues around the palace, but the city itself is spared the fate Ashenfeld suffered. No torches follow Cashin's soldiers, and relief wagons enter behind them instead of looters. Frightened families line the streets, unsure whether disciplined mercy will survive the final approach to the palace. The 14-year-old inside him still wants the perfect symmetry of ash returned for ash. He could burn Kronberg, leave before noon, and laugh where Otto once laughed. For one terrible moment, revenge appears simple, complete, and emotionally deserved. Then Cashin remembers the woman with the gray child and the first well beneath the rubble. He remembers building everything because ordinary suffering was unbearable, not because enemies deserved pain. Burning innocent people would not avenge Aschenfeld. It would prove Otto's philosophy contagious. Cashin announces that Velmar came for the tyrant, not for mothers, craftsmen, or children. Any soldier harming a civilian will answer under the same law protecting citizens at home. The army obeys because Theodora's justice was built before vengeance could test it. Kronberg's capital falls without becoming another corpse. Cashin enters the Golden Palace, where Otto waits before a throne untouched by rain, hunger, or fire. The old emperor stands straight, composed, and unwilling to pretend he fears the ending. He calls Cashin the well digger and invites him to complete the symmetry by burning everything. Cashin answers that refusing the symmetry is exactly why Otto lost. Power built on fear can seize a city in one morning, but it cannot build anything people choose to defend. Cashin tells Otto that Kronberg did not lose to a larger army because it still had greater numbers. It lost to a better idea of what an empire could become. Otto built commanders afraid to think, soldiers forced to obey, and children valued only for usefulness. Cashin built a government that challenged him, an army protecting chosen lives, and citizens who trusted the law. Nothing in Otto's empire loved him enough to remain whole when fear stopped working. The old conqueror listens, and for one instant, understands the shape of his defeat. He admits perhaps he raised a realm incapable of loving its ruler. Then pride closes the opening, and Otto refuses repentance for Cashin's father, Aschenfeld, or any burned city. He declares that he will not kneel, beg, or become smaller, simply to please the victor. Cashin has carried a sword toward this man for 7 years. A younger version of him imagined ending the debt with one blow in the throne room. Cashin lowers the sword he carried toward this moment, and orders the guards to enter. He gives Otto the one thing the tyrant denied every victim: law. Otto is arrested before witnesses and charged publicly with murder, conquest, unlawful war, and mass suffering. He leaves the throne room alive, denied both a heroic death and the secrecy that protected his crimes. Weeks later, the trial opens before Kronberg citizens, freed territories, Aschenfeld survivors, and neutral coastal powers. Otto initially refuses counsel, claiming no ordinary court possesses authority over an emperor. The judges answer that authority is exactly what the charges require the court to examine. Witnesses describe burned towns, murdered rulers, stolen children, and raids renamed as border corrections. Aldrich speaks about Cashin's father without turning grief into permission for revenge. Iris testifies last, not as a daughter ordered to condemn her blood, but as a citizen describing how power used human lives. Otto watches her with cold disappointment and attempts one final command through nothing more than her childhood name. Iris finishes speaking without lowering her eyes. Cashin sits among the witnesses rather than the judges, refusing control over every part of justice. Neutral envoys record the proceedings, so no later legend can transform Otto into a misunderstood martyr. The verdict cannot return the dead, but it destroys the fiction that conquest placed one man above judgment. A sword might have preserved Otto as a glorious fallen conqueror. Law reduces him to an ordinary criminal, answerable for ordinary crimes. When Otto is led away, Iris grieves without shame, and Cashin does not ask her to simplify the feeling. She feels sorrow he never earned, relief that frightens her, an emptiness where childhood fear once stood. The death ends not with a private blade, but with truth spoken before people fear once kept silent. Otto's empire is dismantled, and its instruments of terror are placed under public control. Secret prisons open, stolen records return, and conquered lands regain the right to decide their own governments. Provisional councils receive food and protection without being forced to exchange one master for another. Any region joining Velmar must do so through public agreement rather than occupation disguised as rescue. The end of conquest will not become another conquest wearing kinder colors. After the judgment, Iris stands again inside the hall where her father once decided the shape of her life. The towering figure of her childhood has become a cold old man, unable to understand why everyone left him. Otto made her a weapon, but the final direction of that weapon belonged entirely to her. She did not end his cruelty because Cashin learned to use her more effectively. She ended it because being seen as a person gave her freedom to choose what she believed. Across the captured hall, Cashin meets her eyes without demanding triumph, gratitude, or apology. She is allowed to mourn the father she had while rejecting everything he chose to become. Cashin is allowed to feel justice without pretending. Justice erases the years of loss. Neither of them becomes simpler merely because the enemy has fallen. They transformed Otto's game pieces into people capable of choosing the ending. They ended a monster without asking Iris to become one. That shared understanding is enough. The law has spoken, the empire of fear is broken, and the debt has reached its final account. The war is won, the tyrant has fallen, and the debt Cashin carried since childhood is finally collected. Yet triumph does not erase the bodies covering the road toward victory. Velmar won as cheaply as 7 brilliant plans could make possible, but cheap is only comparative. Citizen soldiers who dug drains and raised docks will not return to the families waiting in Ashenfeld. Mountain warriors who survived years on the frontier fall during the final campaign. They chose to finish. Kronberg conscripts also lie dead, many forced into service by a ruler who valued them no more than tools. Cashin walks the battlefield after victory because a ruler must look directly at the price of his orders. He sees familiar insignia, broken weapons, and finished letters, and young faces from both armies. The dead do not become numbers merely because the arithmetic justified the campaign. Brunhilde finds him standing among the cost, with blood drying across armor that is not entirely hers. She says victory and grief are not opposites, because every true victory carries both. Ashenfeld may dance when the army returns, and ordinary people deserve that uncomplicated joy. The emperor must carry the count, so future blood is never spent for vanity, boredom, or pride. Cashin accepts that burden as part of the crown he once considered worthless. He will remember every grave when advisors later suggest force as the easiest answer. The war was necessary, Otto had to fall, and Cashin would make the same decision again. Necessity does not make suffering clean, beautiful, or free. Theodora's sisters tend Velmar and Kronberg wounded together beneath the same lamps. Some soldiers object until Cashin reminds them that law matters most when compassion becomes difficult. Vivin uses the overflowing treasury to feed occupied cities, rather than extract reparations from hungry households. Agia repairs bridges, wells, and roads damaged during the campaign, so civilians do not inherit the battlefield. Roxana hunts remaining secret police before they can disappear into the freed territories. Iris helps local councils identify officials capable of governing without repeating Otto's methods. Lysandra designs a peace that prevents collapse without turning Velmar into another occupying empire. Brunhilde keeps military discipline hard enough that no private revenge becomes public policy. Each woman transforms victory from a conquered capital into the beginning of stable peace. Cashin understands that rebuilding an enemy's future may be harder than defeating its army. Weeks pass before the army begins its return north. They carry honored dead, captured banners, and the exhaustion of people who cross the end of a lifetime. Cashin leaves Kronberg without taking its golden throne. The object means nothing beside the iron crown placed on the first well, and the people who chose him. He orders Otto's treasury used first to compensate burned cities and support territories scarred by conquest. Ashenfeld will receive justice, but not by stripping another population into hunger. Vivin calculates that stable, free neighbors will create more trade than ruined provinces. Their argument follows the returning column and sounds almost like home. At the first sight of Velmar's frontier towers, Brunhilde's clans raise a song for the dead. Ashenfeld soldiers join with different words and the same grief. Kashin realizes the realm now possesses shared memory, not merely shared institutions. As the column nears Ashenfeld, citizens line the roads before the walls are visible. Farmers leave safe fields that Kronberg raiders once burned whenever crops began to rise. Children wave school slates painted with the names of returning relatives. Families search every face while fearing the empty place behind the next rider. Kashin dismounts before entering the gate. He walks beside the wagons carrying those who will never see what their sacrifice protected. Brunhilde walks with him, while officers lower banners and the crowd's celebration softens into mourning. The procession passes through walls built from mansions abandoned by nobles who expected the city to die. Then the gates open, and the living city reveals what the sacrifice protected. Paved streets shed rain into drains, running clean beneath ordinary footsteps. Fountains flash in every square, fed by Aegea's aqueduct from the hills. Markets were 3 stalls deep beneath lamps that make evening another working hour. The mint strikes trusted silver, while forges, once making weapons, have returned to tools and plowshares. Ships crowd the harbor where grieving fishermen once stared at an empty shore. Schools release children who read languages their parents never learned. Hospitals stand open, and courts allow a common woman to defeat a lord through evidence. The people cheering are not honoring a conqueror returning with foreign ash. They honor the emperor who dug a well, ended a tyrant, and refused to become one. Somewhere in the crowd stands the woman whose child once looked gray from poisoned water. The child is older, healthy, loud, and sitting on shoulders strong enough to carry him. The crippled mason raises a scarred hand, while the former barge brothers shout from a dockworker's banner. The boy who dragged timber from the well is nearly grown, and carries an engineer's measuring frame. Kashin cannot see every person who built the transformation, but he knows none of it belongs to him alone. He moved one stone, and convinced thousands that the next stone could also move. The city they raised answers Otto's laughter, more completely than any burned capital ever could. Ashenfeld celebrates for days, but Kashin keeps the memorial before the victory feast. Names of the fallen are read beneath the restored roof, where only 11 people attended his coronation. Families receive lifelong support from the treasury their loved ones helped create. Brunhilde stands beside mountain widows while city workers stand beside soldiers' children. Theodora reminds everyone that gratitude must survive longer than music, banners, and summer flowers. After mourning, the streets fill with dancing that Kashin allows himself to watch without guilt. The people carried fear for years, and joy is another freedom they earn. Peace immediately demands work that no victory song can complete. Otto's conquered lands need food, courts, local councils, and protection from men hoping to inherit his fear. Kashin refuses forced annexation and offers association through treaty and public consent. Some territories choose independence, some form leagues, and others freely enter Velmar for security and trade. Vivin creates agreements making cooperation more profitable than occupation. Lysandra protects local authority while requiring common rights no regional lord may erase. Agia sends builders to restore neglected roads and water systems. Brunhilde trains local defenders so freedom does not leave villages helpless before the next strongman. Roxana dismantles secret prisons and redirects their records toward missing people and stolen property. Iris travels through lands once frightened by her family name, and listens before proposing anything. Theodora builds courts, hospitals, and schools rather than monuments celebrating conquest. Kashin asks how law can survive the day a worse ruler inherits the crown. Theodora answers that good rulers die, so justice must never depend on always having one. The sentence becomes the foundation of reforms binding the emperor to published law. Budgets appear in market squares where citizens can see what taxes billed. Soldiers may report commanders, workers may petition officials, and regional councils gain elected voices. No institution becomes perfect, because storms, corruption, pride, and failure do not vanish after one victory. The difference is that problems now meet capable people, visible rules, and a population unwilling to surrender. Months later, Cassian gathers the 7 women in the restored Great Hall. The roof holds against summer rain, but their arguments strike harder than any storm. Lysandra challenges spending, Vivin attacks slow approvals, and Agia refuses shortcuts around safety. Brunhilde demands stronger frontier posts, while Theodora asks who pays the human cost. Roxana warns that every new institution creates shadows someone will eventually exploit. Iris points out where inherited Kronberg habits still hide beneath kinder language. Cassian no longer measures leadership by how quickly the room obeys. He measures it by whether the room can correct him before a mistake becomes law. The government of willing minds becomes the achievement he values above walls, ships, and victory. It will survive because nobody inside it belongs only to him. Each person chose the work, shaped the structure, and holds authority enough to defend its purpose. The empire ceases to be a monument to one resurrected prince. It becomes a living agreement among millions with reasons to maintain it after Cassian is gone. That is the foundation Otto could never understand, and therefore could never destroy. At the end of the first summer of peace, Cassian climbs the northeastern wall without guards or ceremony. This is the breach once closed with stone taken from mansions whose owners abandoned the city. Lysandra is already waiting above, watching lamps appear one by one across the streets. Below them, fountains catch the final sunlight and ship lanterns double in calm harbor water. Markets remain loud after sunset, while children run home from schools through streets no longer feared. The forges glow, hospitals keep their night lamps, and distant court bells close another day of law. Lysandra asks whether he remembers standing there when the wall was only half built. She had calculated Ashenfeld's death 100 times, and never found a number supporting survival. Cassian had said they could truly do it, while neither fully believed the sentence. Now, the living city below makes disbelief look almost childish. Pale gold unfolds beside Cassian's vision for the first time since Iris freely chose the realm. The light arrives gently, without warning, command, or another impossible task. The crown system says it awakened when Cassian swore a true oath. Inside complete ruin, its purpose was to help raise an empire through bonds freely given and honestly meant. 7 true oaths and thousands of willing hands accomplished what gold alone never could. The realm now possesses knowledge, trade, law, institutions, and loyalty capable of generating their own strength. Cassian feels gratitude and a quiet fear of losing the presence that accompanied every impossible step. The system reminds him that the first well existed before any reward appeared. Gold rewarded those truths, but it created none of them. The system never manufactured loyalty. It forced Cassian to distinguish loyalty from obedience. Its harshest lesson was the 5% marriage, revealing that clever strategy could hide the same cruelty he hated. Without that judgment, Cassian might have continued using people while praising himself for being different from Otto. Future choices will come without numbers measuring whether a heart is honest. Cassian must listen, apologize, count, and judge without supernatural certainty. That responsibility frightens him more than the first winter once did. A realm dependent forever on one emperor's private miracle would never truly belong to its people. The system says its task is complete because the ruin has become a realm. What comes next must be built by free people in ordinary rooms and open light. The pale letters fold away without pain, leaving no emptiness behind. Lysandra asks whether the system is gone. Cassian answers that its work is finished, and their dependence on it should finish too. She looks across the city and says the numbers support him. The treasury grows through trade, the population through safety, and knowledge through teaching. The bonds remain when the rewards stop, proving they were relationships rather than transactions. Cassian feels the last old fear loosen around his heart. The boy inside the servants' passage no longer needs revenge to prove he survived. The emperor from the roofless hall no longer needs miracles to prove he can rule. The man on the wall needs only to remain worthy of the people who chose the work. Below, The last lamplighter enters the district where the first well still serves the square. Its repaired stone rim remains plain, preserving the memory of the iron crown once placed there. Citizens drink without remembering how recently the river poisoned their children. That forgetfulness is not ingratitude, but the success of making safety ordinary. Cashin looks toward the restored palace and sees the repaired roof glowing above the hill. The hall, once open to rain, now shelters arguments louder than any storm. That noise pleases him more than obedient silence ever could. Living nations argue about what they will become. Lysandra squeezes his hand and tells him the lamps are almost fully lit. Cashin counts them without meaning to, then loses the number as districts merge into gold. Students carry books beneath windows their parents once boarded against raiders. A healer crosses a square toward a patient who expects to survive. A mother fills a jug from a fountain and gives the first cup to her child. None of them know Cashin is watching. Their ordinary evening continues without needing the emperor's presence. That independence feels like the purest success of his reign. The city no longer performs life for a ruler. It lives entirely for itself, without needing him at all. Cashin remembers Otto's complete roof, full table, and empire of frightened tools. All that visible strength concealed a structure empty at the center. Otto measured power by how quickly others obeyed. Cashin measures it by how confidently they continue when he is absent. Otto left ruins, proving nobody could resist him. Cashin leaves institutions, proving nobody should need him forever. That difference contains the whole story. The laughter on his father's steps finally sounds distant enough to belong to history. His father is avenged, and the city his father loved finally has a future. Healing is not forgetting the wound, but reaching a day when it no longer directs every movement. The first stars appear above the restored roof and completed walls. Harbor lanterns answer them from the dark water. The air smells of bread, forged smoke, rain-washed stone, and the river carried cleanly past the city. No starving crowd waits outside a hidden granary. No bravos carry torches toward a disgraced house. No child drinks from the river because every safer source failed. The absence of disaster creates its own quiet music. Lysandra once told him the empire was dead and simply had not finished falling. Now, she watches the same empire breathe and admits the arithmetic has become undeniable. Cashin says wrong sums help them search harder for the correct sequence. Lysandra tells him he is becoming sentimental again. He answers that sentiment is acceptable when supported by overwhelming evidence. She laughs, and the sound joins the city below.